So let's talk about the four major categories of hazards that affect people in the constructions industry. As I can see, you're very interested in it. There's falls, caught between, struck bys, and electrocutions. As you can see on the screen there, I'll read it. There's a percentage of where they occur. It'd be mindful. It'd be good to keep in mind, actually, the 34 of falls. I had a really fun story. Really just don't feel like telling the stories about this stuff anymore. Quite frankly, we have these things called emphasis programs that we try to connect to the industry in regard to these major hazards. And we got 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, at least we got fives. 6 out of 30. Guys driving. That's cool. But to address these, and it's interesting because we've been working on this Stop Fall Save Lives since 2012 across the nation. You would imagine that with over a decades of hammering the message, you might have some impact, significant impact at that to the hazard or the condition. And unfortunately, there hasn't been very much. As of a couple of years ago, as you can see, it says 2019, wild, Work Zone Awareness Week, but 2022, I believe, was the first year that actually struck bys, which is typically being struck by a vehicle. There are others struck by. What is that line that happened there? I didn't do that, but something happened. Is that part of my presentation, that yellow line? Does everybody see that? Hello? Is there no? Oh, there it goes. It's gone. Thank you. However, it was just I didn't understand how it happened. Either way, struck bys superseded falls across all industry, not just construction, but across all industry. Construction only represents about 4% of the working population in the United States of America. So at that point, there was a national emphasis on both general industry and construction for struck bys. And kind of a nuance, I would imagine that it seems somewhat intuitive that distracted driving would be a major undertaking there, and it is. However, disturbingly, a lot of our struck by vehicles are actually on site, particularly in construction, of course. So instead of pointing fingers outward often, we should probably at least try to take care of the things that we take care of. And so those are some of the things that I like to emphasize during the Struck by a Work Zone Awareness Week is that, yes, certainly we have to have appropriate temporary traffic control plans and work zones, but not to ignore or overlook some of the things that we could do inside of our own work areas, because we do bear that brunt as well. Another one also has been going on in the industry of excavations, is that because by far of any exposure or any industry per person hour, if you will, man hour put into the work activity, it's the most dangerous activity that we have in all of construction. It's not even close. We typically refer to that as a crushed by or caught in between issue. And I'm being very specific about that because, again, focus 4. What are we talking about? Falls, electrocutions, struck by, and then the other category of caught between and or crushed by. And the reason I want, because struck by and caught in between and crushed by are very sometimes hard to discern between the two. So being struck by a vehicle, being crushed or caught in between in an excavation, or maybe in between an equipment and a fixed post or a building or something like that, can also be kind of a caught in between. So anyway, there's been a long emphasis on excavations as well, again, being very specific to construction. To that note of no, we'll get to it when we get to the fall protection, because the way this presentation is set up is we're going to deal with each one of the focus 4 separately and kind of illuminate the hazards specifically, some of the regulations that are behind it as well. Generally speaking, as I was saying, what is this? This is struck by? Again, being so difficult sometimes to discern. Yeah, struck by collapsing product or equipment, um, materials, whether we want to call it struck by or whether we want to call it crushed by. Some fact is we have rules that talk somewhat ambiguous, unfortunately. Some of these rules that talk about how do you properly store some of these materials. It says, stack rack, whether it be pipe, whether it be block or brick material. Typically, as a rule of thumb, it's a lot more specific depending upon how the material is stacked within and with how it's stacked, and then literally how it's banded and or stacked on. That's not me, is it?
No, it's not
No,
you.
it's Neil.
I'm put him on mute.
Could be me.
Oh, yeah, that's you. So,
Struck by lightning.
what is that? I don't get that. Struck by lightning. I don't get that. It's a joke. I don't know. Whether they be banded by plastic wrap and such like that. Rule of thumb: 2 pallets high, no higher. Rigging equipment, slings, this variety. We're talking about rigging equipment, whether it be in this case, we're talking about nylon slings. Got to inspect them. Defective rigging. This is the way it speaks about in the standard. However, manufacturer is going to have a lot more information depending on the type of sling as to what causes things to become defective. Sometimes we do have certain specificities, particularly in our wire rope slings, and about how many wires per lay or per strand, pardon me, are allowable to be broken, and how many concurrently, as well as in a lay. A lay being how the distance in a wire rope that it takes for one of the strands to get all the way around, as it's that's how wire rope is configured as in the kind of corkscrew configuration. But some of the things that we're looking for, and particularly with the nylon or fabric slings, would be, well, first off, that it be marked with its rated capacity. I see that there is a tag, and certainly you could probably contact the manufacturer and get a new tag and sew it or glue it. Or I wouldn't really prefer gluing. I really wouldn't prefer getting another tag. I mean, if the tag is shot, your sling's probably shot. Regardless of what technically. And I know it's easy for me to spend somebody else's money, but other areas of interest certainly are going to be at the edges of the sling, not so much maybe some incidental pock marks. And I'm not suggesting that they shouldn't be taken care of. You want to take care of your stuff, absolutely. But maybe some incidental pock marks. Again, manufacturer is going to be the ultimate authority on what constitutes defectiveness. But incidental pock marks within the body of a sling might not be as concerning as you see in the right hand picture in the upper right. Some of the fraying damage along the edges, and in this case, particularly in the eyelet or the well, it's all working pieces of a sling, but certainly the portion that's going to be under great strength or stress. Again, the entirety of this sling, but eyelets along the edges, things that concern me. What a great photo to just kind of insert in there. I think we're still in the section that is constituted as being struck by, but this sure as heck, I would suggest is something that you could probably chalk up to a crushed by, as well as, and again, because of the somewhat, so what am I supposed to just speak about, not getting into locations where has a release of hazardous energies can occur. Yeah, I would hope and I expect. I've never seen a more panned out version of this photograph myself, but I would hope that there is some sort of a mechanical uh, um, chalk block, whatever you might call that, to compensate for the potential release of hydraulic uh, 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 forces, and thus the release of the gravitational energies that would be incurred into that location. Other circumstances of this, just locally and sometimes not so obviously, as far as these type of being in the, what do they call it, line of fire, often a type of accidents or incidences where the release of stored energies, potential energies become kinetic energies. That is ultimately what lockout tagout is about in all of its various forms: electrical, hydraulic, pneumatic, gravity, things of this nature. Was down at Hart Plaza. And I guess I just want to make sure this is all Michigan kind of a group, right? This is all Michigan, right? Okay, so I just want to make regional um, relevance. But down at Hart Plaza, this is years and years ago. But a company named Lonzo Lining, I think they're over here in Clinton Township, Macomb County. What they were doing to recondition the sewers in the Detroit, they're very large sewer, not typical, just a pipe. It's more of like a brick lined, a masonry lined sewers in Detroit. Well, would be very expensive to do, all of the remasonry. So relining it entailed using this somewhat of like a plastic bag, a double layer plastic bag with epoxy substrate within it in a liquid form. And it would be all rolled up on the back of a flatbed trailer, and they drop it down the sewer, and then they fill it up with water, and it would unravel through the sewer till it gets to the end of the river. And then they heat the water, cures the epoxy. It creates this pipeline, and then they cut the end of it off, and the water that was heated to the process just out in the river is fun. But then they have to cut all the services, as they call them, or the sewer drops into the pipe. And then so they cut actually with a chainsaw, cut out these large sections, of the wall of that epoxy pipe relining, and then they had to get it out. And the crane was set up in the Hart Plaza area, dropping down a manhole shaft, and then with just one series of pulleys at the corner to then go horizontal, fasten it on or rig it on to the debris that was cut out of the service, and then bring it to the vertical and then hoist it out. But they kept on getting hooked up or jammed up on by at the shiv or the wheel, the pulley, whatever you want to call it, at the corner. So they stationed a gentleman there, a worker. Oh my gosh. Just to shake it loose as it gets hung up a little bit. There's going to be a guy at the end too who's going to be helping it along. It's if it's bound up on something on the floor, but just relatively clear of stuff. We were going to have tools and stuff anyway, as you can imagine, because I'm telling you the story. That piece got hung up, and tension built up very quickly, and obviously released at one point. And that's also a struck by type of injury, obviously fatality in this case, which is also similar to the somewhat I don't want to call them non-conventional, but usually conventionally when we're talking about lockout tagout, at least myself being an electrician by trade, I think about electricity often. Not so much just the standard release of energies in all of their varieties. Cab glass, got to be able to see out of them. Amazingly enough, there's no obligation to even have any. So, I'm not trying to promote people just knocking the glass out when there becomes a crack or anything like that. If you do have glass, it must be as a safety glass variety. From my understanding, that means it's not going to shatter. It's got that, just like your windshield. But certainly in demolition activities and things like that, you may not have. There might be, bars or other kind of protecting devices for the operator of a cab, and that is adequate. But certainly, if you can't see out of it, which brings me to another discussion really when it comes to struck buys. And as I was talking about how we have that national road work zone awareness, campaign or week that occurs annually. But we're taking a look at a couple of pieces of equipment, safety equipment, functional equipment as well, on just a typical type fork truck or other, maybe a front end loader in the right hand picture. I'm not sure. I see some yellow, so it's not the same vehicle. But if you can't see, I don't know. Cameras are everywhere. I'm not saying they're a panacea. No tool ever so far as I figure out, is a panacea to everything. So, it doesn't mean you can't use mirrors or shouldn't use mirrors or shouldn't do other things, but cameras would do a heck of a service, I think. I'd hate to accuse an operator running over somebody that they would have seen, yet it still happens. And I'm pretty sure if given half a chance, every operator would have preferred to at least had the opportunity to have a camera on equipment. We don't have any regulations that require that, but since we're just talking safety here today, but just remind myself a little bit about, oh yeah, because we have rules that talk about vehicles that have restricted view or yeah, restricted view to the rear of the equipment. That's every piece of equipment, including your car, minivan, or whatever. Everything's got restricted view. You're supposed to have a backup beeper that's audible above the ambient noise or something to this effect. Man, I don't know. That might be like 1940s technology or something. And I'm not saying just because it's all we got to get rid of it, but I think we could probably do a little bit better. And similarly with hard hats, as I'll wait until I get to fall protection to tell that tale. I mean, think about hard hats, just since I tease it. Hard hats, when do we start using hard hats? Well, building the Hoover Dam. Rocks are falling down onto people, and they got these hats that are designed to keep them from the radiation of the sun, like that, working in the desert on this project. And they keep on getting hit in the head, so they dip them in tar, make them kind of hard. Now they're a hard hat. I mean, we're still using the same basic technology that was being used. I don't know what year was 19. When was Hoover Dam built? 1928, 1932. I'm not sure. I'm sorry. But yeah, we get really focused on convention. And it's interesting. The older we get, the more firm we get in our convention. Isn't it funny? Oh, I thought that was reading my words. I was speaking here for a second, the way it comes up on this PowerPoint. That's a little odd. But yeah, we got to watch out for that. Especially people that are in positions of leadership. Open minds are very important. Really, 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 really. I can't say really enough. But bidirectional machines such as front end or not, sorry, not, it does say front end loaders, compactors, rollers, bulldozers, similar equipment, got to be equipped with a horn. This is not the backup alarm thing. This is just literally a horn. Distinguishable, obviously, from the surrounding noise level. And you're supposed to operate it when you move in either direction. Huh. Huh. Interesting. Don't often see that done. My enforcement officer probably should be citing that a little bit more, but literally, maybe I should be teaching about it a little bit harder. Because it's not often emphasized. I'm going to tell you that. Maybe for front, it is somewhat conventional for a roller. But it's talking about all bidirectional machines. It's actually dawning on me. Pardon. It's Paris. No. Equipment which has obstructed view to the rear. This is what I was speaking about a little bit earlier. Shan't be used in the reverse gear unless the equipment has reverse signal alarm, distinguishable. The beep, beep, beep. 1940 technology. There's no mandate or obligation to put backup cameras on equipment, retrofit or otherwise. I know a lot of new equipment does come with it. I was doing an excavation class at CAM, actually, if you're familiar with that, over in Woodward, Bloomfield Hills. coincidentally, is apparently the oldest construction organization in the nation. But doing a class down there, and there was a bunch of guys from a company called Sterling Excavations or Excavating or something up in East Tawas. I came all the way down to Bloomfield Hills for this class, and there was like 6 or 7 of them. Anyway, I was getting on. I kind of get on little crusades, and one of them is this. And the reason it occurred, I became on this crusade was because I ended up buying a new truck. It wasn't new; it was just new to me, of course. But it was 2017, and it had a backup camera in it. I never had a backup camera in any of my vehicles before, and I've been driving trucks for my whole life too. It's not like that was anything new. But when I first put it in reverse and that camera came on, it was like, raw. It totally distracted me. And I was like, I don't even know what those lines mean. And I wished I could turn it off, but whatever. After, I don't know, can't remember the timing or whatever, probably about a week, wasn't that long. I started to kind of understand what those lines were kind of doing. Now, I still used my mirrors and I still looked because there was no way I was going to take 100% faith in this. Like, I couldn't just take 100% faith in it. But I'm going to I got pretty good at it now. I'm pretty sure I could drive backwards almost as good as I could drive forward because of that darn thing. And it's pretty, I've gotten pretty good at using that tool. But now that I get my state truck, because I get a state truck to do all state business and everything when I'm driving there. Well, it's a minivan. It's got windows all the way around it. It's a whole lot better view, I'd say, than even my pickup truck, just because of the way the corner posts are. Yeah, I ain't gonna get into all, but it doesn't have a backup camera. And man, when I put it in reverse, like coming out of a parking lot, I almost get out of the car because I can't handle it. I can't handle it. I can't see exactly what's right behind me. Now, I ain't no worry wart either, just to be honest with you. But it's just amazing how accustomed I got to it, and amazing how much the reluctance I had without it, because I had gotten used to the greater view that I had before. Anyway, I was pounding it. And these guys at Sterling is like, oh, and I was also telling them about hey, look at this, I'm wearing it too. Got my Dan's shirt on. I've been doing it for 10 years here with Dan's. I'm really proud, actually, of the relationship that I've been able to kind of forge with Dan's Excavating. Apparently, by I don't know, by volume, by budget or whatever, but by dollars, they're the largest infrastructure contractor now in the state of Michigan. Well, I've been working here with the state of Michigan since 2003, and as an enforcement officer, and I live in Sterling Heights. I'm like right here in Macomb County. This is my area. Underground contractors in MIOSHA was not really on speaking terms unless we were doing appeals. Everything was an appeal. Very confrontational was the relationship, to say the least. Anyway, there was a coalition that from the AUC, the Association of Underground Contractors, with the Michigan Road Builders Association, which henceforth became MITA, as you might be familiar with now. And there's tended to be a little bit better relationship with MIOSHA, but still not great. We also have MIOSHA set grants that went in to help either way. I remember through our MTI, we have a MIOSHA Training Institute where we put on classes, whether it be at Macomb Community College, CAM, Detroit Training Center, and elsewhere throughout the state, generally speaking at local colleges, where we can have, these safety, some might say it's somewhat like an equivalent to a 30-hour, OSHA 30-hour, but so much more. Either way, we created these certificates. They are recognized at Oakland University, and I want to say Grand Valley State University as well, for credits, actual credits to their safety and health program degrees that they have at the programs. Anyway, pretty cool how we've grown. But there was a guy, a retired cop on his second career. He's taking classes over at Macomb Community College, taking an excavation class, and next thing you know, he's working for Dan's Excavating as a safety director. And then he started doing this safety spring show, and I've been working with him since they started this 10 years ago, and it was great because it was because of the opportunity to discuss this safety stuff with management. Either way, I'm very proud of it. And I told these people at this class, I was like, man, I've been trying to get Dan's Excavating to retrofit all their equipment and blah, blah, blah. And they're like, and I'm not getting a lot of traction. And they're like, well, we did that. I'm thinking, wow, a small little company out of East Tawas called Sterling Excavating or whatever. They retrofit all their equipment with backup cameras. And I understand particularly a lot of the operators' reluctance to this, especially old guys. They're like, those kids start putting 100% faith in those things and they don't know how to drive. Well, yeah, no, I can see that happen. And that's why you got to have good examples, good training, especially those old guys get all that common sense, They got to start being procurers of the common sense because I understand it ain't all available. Anyway, but don't tell them they're idiots when you do give them that common sense because they don't tend to come back to people calling them names. And I don't blame them. So be a good procurer in common sense and be a good experience in training. I know I started this training day off awful aggressive, but it's just one of my things that makes me upset. I like to have a conversation, and I am starting to stare at certain people like admin, Mike Blanzy, even just top of his head. Rick, you've been here the whole time, so I got you. Thanks. But yeah, it doesn't mean that cameras are a panacea. There's other things too, quite frankly. And I almost wanted to keep this close to my vest because one of you guys might steal it and become a millionaire. And if you do it, please, because I'm lazy. I never follow through and do shit with my life. No, I'm sorry. But like during COVID, there was a construction company, and they wanted to keep their people working as much as possible, which who doesn't? And that whole rule about being within 6 feet of somebody that came down with COVID for more than 15 minutes for the previous 24 hours. I can't remember all the stinking thing about it, but there was a thing, if you remember, about 15 minutes and stuff. And this contractor went and put proximity sensors on all his dudes. Now, these proximity sensors would flash, buzz, and beep whenever they got within, I don't know if he set it to 10 feet, 6 feet, whatever. He probably set it to whatever the rule said, so that when two people got close, they're like, what the fuck? Get away from me. You know what I mean? And he also could document how long they were infringing on that 6 foot thing. Well, gosh, I mean, that's a hell of an effort. That's a hell of an effort. Can we do that with equipment? If we had like a sender on the equipment and everybody was wearing these buzzers and it went off at 15 feet, at least because half of them are trying to fight your rules. Now, I'm not saying you guys, because you guys are inspectors and stuff, but just trying to empathize with the difficulty with getting people that have their own motivations. They want to listen to their tunes. So they got, iPods in it. I've even heard of companies compromising and saying, okay, fine, you can only put one in. It's like, oh my gracious, right? But it's got to have a traction in the industry or we're just blowing smoke. You can say all the things you want unless it actually happens. But I don't know. That could help. Just like I say, there's no panacea. We could put a ton of mirrors, put a ton of cameras. We could do this. Great idea too. I'm thinking if we do them all, we might not get so many people getting run over though. That's important because it happens way, way too much. And honestly, it is quiet. But if anyone has any kind of relevant story or add-on or something, please. It really makes it feel a whole lot more real to me if you do that. It's not, we got 3 hours. I talk fast. You already noticed that. Traffic control devices got to be installed just like the Michigan Manual on Uniform Traffic Control Devices. Part 6 says Part 6 is the temporary traffic control section. So truly, the Michigan Manual on Uniform Traffic Control Devices has many parts, at least 6 of them. And all those other parts deal with how do they do the normal building of roads as far as the lines and stuff like that's concerned, and the spacing and the distances and everything. Now, Part 6 is the temporary traffic control section. Now, they're not going to deviate a lot from the normal types, and that's generally the rule. Generally, the rule for temporary traffic control is that it should resemble a lot normal type of traffic patterns and such. In fact, well, I get a lot of the Michigan Manual on Uniform Traffic Control Devices is really just advice and guidance for a qualified person who's devising or generating, creating, planning the temporary traffic control plan. because there's no two road situations that are the same. So you can only get so much out of a book. It just can only be suggestions, guidance, and stuff in certain circumstances, certain locations, and this and that and the other. So it's not really the most or best or easiest document to regulate. Easy thing to regulate is that at least they have a plan. Now, maybe I can argue or differ with parts of the plan that are suggestive and such. Some of the suggestions, actually, interestingly enough, as of the last year or two, and you probably noticed it as you drive around everywhere in construction zones, they are trying to reduce significantly, if ever having it at all, deviations greater than 10 miles per hour from the normally posted speeds. Why? Because changes in speeds are what causes accidents more than speed, really. And having abrupt changes in traffic speeds, especially since you have the inconsistent adherence, creates lots of deviations in speed, which causes a whole lot more accidents as they analyze these incidences going forward. So it's kind of, you probably have noticed this type of thing where you're like, oh my God, we're going pretty fast in this construction zone. You know what I mean? As opposed to maybe a few years ago where it was very much more rigidly like you got. And I'm not trying to propose my own opinion on this matter. However, I do like science. And so, and I like to go fast too. No, I'm just kidding. I hope somebody out there is laughing because some of these are pretty, they're bad jokes, but other ways that we can get struck by, and or quite frankly, it almost like we should just do the fatal three, because crushed by, struck by, and caught between seem to get all muddled up, to be honest with you. This, I'd really call it more of being a crushed by. I mean, if you get, it depends, I suppose. If you're crushed between the moving counterweight and a fixed object, that's pretty crushed by. If you get struck by the moving counterweight, that's just being struck by it. Now, usually I wouldn't think that's going to kill you, but we're in the fatal four and we're talking about struck by still. Anyway, it talks about how if anybody can be struck by the rotating superstructure, counterweight, the hazardous area is going to be barricaded. But how many times have you seen what's going on in the picture? All the time. What do you mean barricaded? Well, there's a number of different ways you can barricade it. You could actually put sawhorse style barricades all the way around the area so that nobody can go in the area, and that's going to gotta encompass the whole entire area, the moving superstructure, counterweight. Or I've seen it also done where, for instance, on the bottom picture here, you might have little basically couplings welded to the side of the tracks, one in the front, one in the back, on the left side, one in the front, one in the back, on the right side, and then, but welded on a bit of a diagonal, so you can stick PVC pipe in there, and then you cut the PVC pipe to the radius of the counterweight, and then it's a moving barricade around your counter or your machine. That's interesting. Let me just carry on here further with Tump 27. If constantly moving excavation equipment can create a pinch point, or if an employee could be struck by that rotating counterweight, an employer shall place in the place of, barricades, shall train their employees and tell them stay out of that area. But in addition to that, we got to put the danger signs on the back and the sides of the house of that counterweight. Okay. So, and then it's employees shall remain clear of the excavation equipment all the time unless they're operating it. Well, yeah, you got to be in it. But I had Conti, the safety director over at Conti, and he called me up. He says, Bryan, Bart Mallow's being mean to me. And I said, yeah, I know. That's what they do. No, he didn't say it all like that, but he was whining because Bart Mallow was telling him that on this site that they were doing some, shallow excavation, put some electrical conduit in the ground or something like that. And that they were doing is that because they're digging and moving, they were using number 27 here and say it's constant moving excavation. And we're not going to put barricades around. We're just going to put the signs on the equipment and tell our people, you ain't supposed to go there. All right. Bart Mallow said, are you going to do that training for everybody on the job site? And they said, what? No. And he says, well, then barricade the area where you're doing this off. interesting, right? Interesting an application of what it means to barricade the back or this activity. And I thought I got to chalk it up to BM, man. That was pretty good. That's pretty good. I like that because I never would have thought of that. That's pretty good. You guys all understand what I mean by that? I don't know. That's pretty good because the number 27 is reliant upon training, not just your guys. Everybody is exposed to this potential, or otherwise it should be barricaded. Cool. It's another one that I'd like to chalk up to getting crushed by, because I mean, if a masonry wall falls on you, I guess it struck you, but it kind of crushed you too. Again, I don't know. My English skills are weak. Don't know exactly how this works, but for walls, interesting. We're the only state. Well, I shouldn't say that. We're the only state to have a comprehensive standard on masonry wall bracing. The Fed standard, it's not in this PowerPoint here because we're not doing a masonry wall bracing presentation, but the Fed standard basically says you got to make sure walls don't fall down. But it doesn't go comprehensively as to creating a restricted zone, having a person assigned to be able to take the wed measurements, having all of the required documents that we require for almost like a hazard communication. MS or SDSs and such like that. We almost require the similar type of thing for the communication of the temporary wall bracing technique, because temporary wall bracing may look like what you see in the picture here. In fact, conventionally, I'd say that's the way you're going to see it. I understand that everybody's seen the 2x10s, in like a triangle. We do have opportunity. That's the only thing actually that we can put in our standard that is somewhat restrictive, or we can hold you to the design of that temporary bracing. It has incredible limitations though, and for that fact, we usually build taller walls than are capable of being braced appropriately with our wooden type of braces. They're just taller. So these hog legs or other type of wall bracing systems that have manufacturers and limitations placed upon them by their manufacturers and such, those are generally more conventional because the walls are just taller than those 16-foot long planks are able to properly hold up or brace. Goodness, that's what they're called. The how and why is Michigan so righteous to have a standard that so specifically deals with these hazards? Well, I think it was 99 in Flushing, the Flushing wall collapse in Flint area, where essentially a masonry wall was built. It was probably for the side of the auditorium of the high school there, because I believe it was at the high school. So it was a very tall wall. I don't know how many feet, 30-something feet, I'm sure. And it was a blustery day. And quite frankly, my intelligent electricians, I could say that because I am one, they decided to take refuge behind the masonry wall and do the work in there. And so did, I believe, I don't know if it was a plumber, HVAC guy, or something to this effect. But I mean, we lost a couple electricians. That's the most important thing is, right? And it's just a joke, guys, just a joke. But yeah, because of the fact that the conventional wisdom, I suppose, of faith amongst trades was the excuse or the major factor as to why we lost 3 lives that day. And why wouldn't the masonry wall be braced appropriately? It's kind of like trusting an electrician. I wouldn't do it. He says, "I'll go get your tinctures or something, man. Them guys are so selfish. They ain't gonna move a finger unless they actually have to. They'll just tell you to be careful and stay away from it. They don't listen to electrician. Same thing. Don't listen to mason either. They don't know. Some of them don't even know how to properly brace this. These are high tech installations. They got rebar inside of them. Now, does a structural engineer of record give a damn about the process of construction? Typically not. They're looking for the end dynamics, the capabilities, strengths, requirements for building codes. So in order to make a wall internally braced during the temporary, before it's received all of its structural integrity from all of the other portions of the building installation, man, you're going to have to add a lot of rod. Just saying. So a lot of the time, because we do have quite a bit of rod in our walls, we're not building hollow walls just out of structural integrity and necessity. Well, let's see if we can account for some of the internal bracing, and then maybe we can supplement it with some exterior bracing, and maybe it doesn't have to be as much. Either way, it's a very complicated process of assuring that masonry walls are not going to fall down on the people. And for this case, we have a reference to a Masonry Wall Institute. Michigan Masonry Institute also collaborated into developing a book, actually, with a multitude of kind of like the MMUTCD does for road delineation and road lines and all the approach distances and such like that. The Masonry Institute came up with a variety of different types of walls based upon 8-inch block, 10-inch block, 12-inch block, rods on 12-inch, 14, 16, 18, 22, or 24, 36, 48. I don't know if it goes much more than 48-inch on centers for rods. Also talked about pin bases, fixed bases. It's quite a document to assist masons to pragmatically build walls and be able to use some of the already in place structurally as they're building it, as opposed to having to get an architect or engineer to double back and add more rods so that they don't have to have these poles on their walls so that they can drive equipment because they get in the way. A lot of the time, that's one of the biggest reasons why people don't install braces. They're in the way. And then some of the information about these walls is that you're supposed to get out. Pardon me, I did a whole Canadian thing there. You got to get out. I still probably did. But of the collapse area or the restricted zone. We used to call it collapse area, but all of a sudden that became too dramatic, so we call it restricted zone. Just like we used to call it Fatal 4 and then Focus 4. Now we're back to Fatal 4. We're getting mean again. But this restricted zone, as in the diagram illustrates, which is not the purposes of this class, but it's the height of the wall plus 4 feet. Now I'm going to tell you, the wall going to blasting out further than 4 feet its height. But still, and it's got to extend 4 feet on either side of the wall. Now, nobody's building a wall in the middle of a field here. You know, usually they got a couple of other walls and stuff. And if those other walls are being used as brace structures and or that can be. Now, all of that's fine, but again, it has to be part of their design, and they're going to have a temporary bracing schedule, I would think, on their on the job site, a print form, or at least some of the references from that booklet that I was just telling you about. Rip out a couple of different pages because not all the walls are built same on center spacing with the bar joists and such, or not bar joists, rebar and such. But this restricted zone has to remain in place until final lateral stability has been reached by the building. Now, final building, the engineer, the guy that designed the building, he ain't going to say it's done until it's absolutely done and the client's moved in and all construction is done. So, but you can rely upon engineers to, as long as they're following, and again, this is not the class on this whole thing, but basic engineering principles and practices, and we reference the documents that we want them to be in adherence to, they can determine that it's reached the equivalent to its final lateral stability, which will allow for contractors to dissolve this restricted zone requirement. And obviously the bracing too, because if it's reaches final lateral stability, you don't need these braces anymore. I guess I've spoken about this for some time, and that's okay, because it is unique here in the state of Michigan that requires some of these additional assurances for masonry walls. And if you guys are inspectors, you guys would also be subject to the requirements. I mean, if you're in the area, I'm going to tell you, our safety officers are going to give you a ticket if it's not appropriate because you didn't have the appropriate training to be able to go in there. And ultimately, they'll rest back on the fact that you should have been able to have training to recognize the hazards associated with masonry walls. The hazards associated with masonry walls, let me just back up, is that you don't know anything by looking at a masonry wall. That's what you learn by the end of the training, the full day training or half day training actually is what it consumes. You learn that you just don't know anything. And so for that matter, when you're on a job site with masonry walls, whether they have braces on them or not, if they're subjected to wind and you haven't reached this final lateral stability or the building's not done, then you better go to the general contractor and say, all right, I've had the training, and so I know that I need to find where's the temporary bracing scheme, because I need to know where are the hazardous walls on this job site. And then also be able to in that report or whatever he provides to you, it'll tell you how that wall is going to be built. With the lap sizes of its, or not laps, but the on centers of the rebar. Now, I'm not sitting here asking anybody to take a ball peen hammer and start knocking holes in the wall to verify that, but that type of information has to be available on the job site. Somebody has to also be taking wind measurements, because it's only good. These braces are only good for up to 40 miles an hour. It means that you have to evacuate the area, that size of the wall plus 4 feet, at 35 miles an hour after 24 hours. The first 24 hours, you got to get out of there at 20 miles an hour because the wall is still green, can't support anything. So, any questions on that? Okay. Well, it seems as though our pace is probably at about a good solid 50-minute pace, 45-minute pace for that module. And if we were to extend that 45, 45, 45 for all four, I guess we'll probably be coming in around the time that we're looking to. Now, you gotta bear with me. This isn't one of our normal presentations. We actually, I can't remember. I think it was this was created just in 2024. It wasn't created by myself, but these programs are legitimately put together specifically for you guys, and so they're a little unconventional than some of our other stock type presentations. So I'm not sure exactly sometimes on timing or maybe a particular slide that might come up. Kind of, oh, what's that? We will, oh, pardon me, we will also have a break. There's no way in heck. I mean, I can't tell whether or not you guys are tired or not. You guys might be really excited about this stuff, and I can just go right straight through. But I'm figuring I'm at least going to need a break, probably at about 1:30, right? Isn't that? Oh, wait, not 1:30, 2:30. Pardon me, I was off 1 hour because we're 3-hour session, correct? All right. So at about 2:30, I expect to just take a nice little break. 10 minutes solid. So since I was just talking about the nuances or sometimes the difficulty in ciphering between the struck by versus the caught between and or crushed by type hazards, might as well put them back to back. Make sure there's no contrast at all. But generally speaking, when we're talking about crushed or caught in between, we're focusing on excavations. As I suggested, it could very well include masonry wall bracing, collapses, or being crushed by a vehicle and a fixed object, as opposed to just being struck blunt force trauma type thing. But I mean, I don't think that is the essence or the necessity that we're looking to get. But so we're talking about excavation. Certainly, there's a little bit of overlap talking about the vehicles in and around this work activity. You see a front end loader there, front end loader, backhoe attachment type Ford truck. I like this picture to start us off because if you can recall, earlier on we were talking about our emphasis programs, and it had that one. It was like a triangle. In fact, I got a couple of stickers. They're still doing it. It says it's a little triangle. It's got a little picture of an excavation there. It says slope it, shore it, shield it. Good things come in threes, they say, and they all start with the letter S. Kind of convenient. Kind of convenient. Ultimately, that means sloping. Oh, it did auto adjust right. I'm gonna have to lean back or something. You got to make the soil self-supporting so that it can lay at its natural angle of repose without moving. The other solution for protecting in excavations, other than making it self-supporting or sloping it. And sloping is the same as benching, because when we bench it, we're going to emulate or be equivalent to the slope. It's just might be using a square bucket, and that's why we like to use benches as opposed to trying to slope it, whatever substrate might be. But making it self-supporting, or as you see in the picture here, shoring, which is actually holding the walls of the excavation up, as opposed to shielding or trench boxes. Trench boxes or trench shields are literally there just to provide you a shield when the excavation wall collapses. So they're no way there to support the walls of the excavation. However, with the basic installation and usage of trench boxes, typically they're pinned right inside the walls of the excavation, because when you use a trench box, you usually dig a hole, drop the box, and then you dig in front of that box and you drag the box. When you drag the box, you're usually kind of cutting the sides of the excavation with the box, so it gets kind of pinned in there. So that's why I want to point out that its job is not actually to hold up the walls, regardless of the way it may look. It's there actually just to provide a shield. So those are the three kind of concepts, kind of like with fall protection. You either got a guardrail, or you got a rope to hold you, or you got a net to catch you. It's like three: top, middle, bottom. Here we got make it self-supporting, hold it up, or provide a shield. Why do I get all excited when I see this picture to start it? Is because, in my opinion, shoring is the only way to do excavations 10 feet and less in depth in any kind of an urbanized area, any kind of a built-up area. I mean, I don't know what they're doing here with gas lines or something. I don't even know what they're burying. But whatever the excavation might be, 2.5 feet wide, 3 feet wide tops, or at the top, whatever. It's definitely 6 feet deep. That's for certain, at least. So if we were to slope this to not get too complex, we're going to have to cut it at a 1-to-1, or slope it at a 45 degrees. So that means that we're going to have 3 feet, because that's the size of the excavation we need to put whatever the heck we're putting in there. And since let's call it 7 feet, because it quite literally is more 7 feet. It's more like 7 feet rather than 6. That means we'd have to go 7 feet that way and 7 feet that way. And so that's 14 plus 3, that's 17 feet across the top that we're going to get. Who's going to replace the curb and the parking lot, and what's on this side? Sloping while it seems, oh, that's got to be the cheapest and easiest way to do this stuff. Baloney. The amount of time it takes to dig more dirt out, not to mention the space and the replacement of whatever the heck you had to tear up in order to get that space to get your proper sloping. I don't know what you're doing with the spoils or the materials that you're digging out of the earth. Are you trucking them away? Are you piling them up? If you're piling them up, you need more space. If you're trucking them away, you need to have a space for the truck. And then, let's talk about that, because you're not usually taking that dirt that you took out and putting it back in. You got to pay, and you got to properly backfill this thing. So the more dirt you take out, the more it's going to cost to fill it back in. Oh my goodness. Sloping doesn't make any sense at all. And when I mean sense, I mean CENTS. It's a backbreaker. You ain't going to make any money. Can't do it. Trench boxes. How about that? This is cool. I mean, we're all from Michigan. We're Michigan proud. Trench boxes are invented in Michigan. Why? Well, there was this company called Efficiency. Well, it was a guy, and he was laying pipe. But because in Michigan, it's basically a mottled soil. Every damn 10 feet, 15, 20 feet, 30 feet, every couple of feet down, the soil's completely changed. Right? We're kind of in that little spot there where the glaciers pulled away. And so our soils are so not uniform. The headache that it was to properly slope excavations and lay pipe, oh, it was mind-numbing. It was killer. Couldn't make no money. This guy wanted to make money. So he says, how are we going to do this? We can't be sloping. This is nonsense. We ain't trying to kill nobody, absolutely. So we got to do this safe. So he devised the concept of a trench box so that it didn't matter what the hell kind of soil, by and large, that you were using. You just dragged this thing. Yeah, this is great. big hunking box. Now, it's great when you're doing brand new infrastructure where there is no other infrastructure around. That's true. That's kind of the inhibiting factor of using a trench box. It's great in certain circumstances. Anytime you're in an urban area doing any kind of redigging and something, well, forget about it. And that's why I say I like this picture because, well, I don't like it in this respect because you don't often see it. It's almost like, well, what is that? That can't work. I don't know. I'm not a design engineer. I'm not a scientist either. But if they say it's going to work, they got insurance. I'm pretty sure it's going to work. But you got to do it properly as the manufacturer, declares in their instructions and whatnot. The principle is very simple, really. So you learn this stuff back when you were in kindergarten, when you were playing with those blocks. Remember, it was like who could get the longest line of blocks that they can hold together and pick them up, right? And you got to put just the amount of rain on it, but not too much. And so similarly, that's how shores work. They actually push onto the walls of the excavation, putting lines of force into the walls of the excavation in a parabolic fashion. Never thought you were using parabolas, I bet. Anyway, maybe it's an ellipse. I can't. Anyway, depending on the soil substrate, style, structure, what it is, will dictate how close we got to set these shores together to get those lines of force to intersect. So when you do pump, they got these hydraulic pumps. I'm not doing some sort of offensive gesture. These hydraulic pumps, you can't just, it stops at a certain strength because you don't want to blow the wall out, right? They put too much pressure on the block so the middle blows out. Anyway, a little bit of science you have to know to use these, but the nice thing is that as you can see, there's little handles on the top. You can install this stuff from the top. You don't ever have to get in the excavation to install most of the stuff. And again, I'm spending a lot of time on it because I don't ever see it. And I know you guys aren't the ones that are calling the shots, but just speak it into truth, right, Bryan? Speak it into truth. Just keep on saying it, and maybe someday. Here's some historical data about the trench fatalities here in the state of Michigan. Wow, right? What's 97, 98 doing? That's 6. 99, you got 4. We're working like gangbusters. If you guys remember, God, the whole world was working in Detroit at that time, as far as I remember. My first job out of 58 was the Great Lakes Crossing Mall. That was in 1997. And like I said, there wasn't people from literally Scotland to LA to Florida to Washington were on my crew when I was working at the Great Lakes Crossing Mall. So there was a lot of folks. There's a lot of work going on. And so certainly that doesn't make it acceptable, but that has a lot to do with those extraordinarily high numbers, at least when reflected upon. The other ones in this category, yeah, we have 2001 with 5, and then 2003 with 5. And I'm pretty sure by the time 2003 is rolling around, we're not doing near amount of work as we were before. I'm pretty sure. I know that for a fact because that's when I started here at Michigan Ocean. The only reason I came got this job was because there's no work. Anyway, I don't know. We could speculate. Why has 2003 got so many? Well, people still got to eat. And sometimes, I'll bet you too, if you look in your farmer's almanac, you take a look at that winter, I'll bet you it's a wet one. Because anybody have a house maybe built in the 60s or 70s, and then every March, April, they got water in their basement. And it's kind of interesting too, because that didn't start to happen until they built that subdivision on the backside where the woods used to be. The woods is just basically a big sponge for water, right? They built those brand new houses backfilled with clay, and all of a sudden your water table's pushing on the basement floor because your drain tile's all filled up because it's just crock clay tile, and it's all filled up with sediment now. So anyway, how do you fix that? Well, you dig a 20-inch ditch around the foundation of the house, about 9.5 feet deep. And then you got to lay some pea gravel down there, drop some new pipe with some skirt, sock around it. We got to set it in there, so somebody's got to get in there. Well, little guy, get down there. And you're going to do this work when it's wet because that's when the water's in the basement. Usually come July or August, nobody's looking to drop $10,000 or $12,000 getting the basement dry because it's dry today. And that would be the best time to do the work, just to be honest, because we all know water's effect on excavations. So anyway, whether it be people doing a little bit more with a little bit less in 2003, whether it be the wet winter, of 2002, 2003. Just getting across a couple of points of how these accidents do happen, and certainly water's impact on excavations. It's a real good picture here. I really enjoy this one here because it's pretty much got everything. And so therefore we can kind of cover all the requirements of excavating in one picture. Well, at 4 foot in depth, we have to have some acceptable means of access for this guy. It's got to be a ladder, usually in a trench, because you're not going to have a ramp in a trench. Sometimes people say, well, what about the backfill? I'm going to backfill in my trench. No, you can't use the backfill. First off, it's got to be stable. So, oh, I compact it. Well, okay. But the walls of the ramp are vertical and thus out of compliance. So anytime you have a ramp, the walls of the ramp also have to be appropriately sloped, self-supporting, or otherwise supported, whether it be by sheet piling or something. But yeah, he's got no access here at 4 foot. That's what you need at 4 foot in depth. You got to do that. Now, I also had a guy one time say to me, respectfully, sir, when he's in the bucket, ain't he protected? I said, well, I see you thinking there, but no, that's not acceptable. He can't be, he's not protected while he's in the bucket. So that's that 4 foot in depth. And now the other thing about that ladder is got to be close enough to the work. We say within 25 foot of the workers. That seems reasonable. But sometimes you have longer trenches, especially actually out west, where you have a whole lot more universal type soils, and you might have these trenches open for a very long period of time. You can't do that in Michigan. We had, first off, too much rain. Second off, the soil is just not nearly consistently clay enough to be able to do something like that. So quite honestly, it's kind of difficult to have a trench, greater than 50 feet, where if you put the ladder in the middle, it's not more or not greater than 25 feet from the workers. And that ladder also has to extend out of the top of the hole. How far? Well, 3 feet. And if you ask why, has anybody ever fished for a ladder? Maybe they're laying on their belly on a roof and looking for that ladder that was just not quite long enough, but they were long enough to get them up there. Anyway, once you get old like me, you kind of like a nice handhold to be able to step onto the ladder so you don't fall off of whatever the heck you're at. So there's that. The big old pile of spoils that he's digging there. First off, let me just give applause to the operator. That operator is pretty darn good. That excavation's got to be solid 10 foot, right? Solid 10 foot deep, right? All right, somebody got a couple nods. All right, solid 10 foot deep. So that's a little machine. That's why I'm giving him kudos. Because not only did he have to dig a 10 foot deep trench, he had to have enough ability to get that flipping arm out there and over without dropping a dirt and make a pile, because he's making a pile. That pile there is 6 or 7 feet tall. So essentially, you might be able to say that this guy in this excavation is in like a 17-foot deep hole. It's just that the top 7 foot is cut at a nice little angle. Now, problem is that that's not what I'm worried about, because it's now also putting a surcharge load on that wall, causing it to be much more, let's say, contagious to fail. So our only rule, unfortunately, to that respect is that you got to keep the spoils pile at least 2 feet away from the top of the excavation, as you can see here. And if you can't see my mouse, which I think you can, you see these giant cobbles here right at the edge, right? Fall onto them. And again, whether the 2 feet be a requirement to provide some sort of a shelf so that stuff can fall onto it, or if it's just trying to get this surcharge load the heck away from a wall. Now, bear in mind, even this rule, the 2 foot back from the top of the excavation, is in the understanding that you're making this excavation self-supporting or otherwise protected. So this is just literally, you could call this imminent danger. And you're like, oh my gosh, he's worried Bryan, I see this stuff all the time. Yeah, I know. It is remarkable that you can see this stuff a lot. But you know what? It only takes once, and the guy's dead. I actually, over here, and we got a section down here. I was going to wait to tell a story, but I can't help it now, just because I'm feeling it. I worked on this accident that happened up on Mound Road, just north of 16 Mile Road, south of 17 on what we call Fox Hill was a side street. And there was a strip mall was built on the west side there. And this crew that had the accident, the parking lot was already kind of prepped and everything. It was all compacted sand, looking ready to go. But they had to make this 5-inch drain tap, I think 5-inch PVC tap out to the street from the strip mall. And so they had a machine pretty much like this one. They had a pipe layer, so a guy in the hole, a tail man, so that's another guy in the hole at the back of the pipe, and then a top guy. 4 guys in a job. And anyway, when I responded to the accident, because we had a collapse, an excavation collapse, when I responded to the accident, because I live up here in Sterling Heights, so that's my assignment. So I go over there, I take my tape measure, I stick it into the hole. If you wouldn't believe, hold on a second, I get some sirens here. I don't know if it interferes with you, but it's in my head, that's for sure. It was 4'11". That's how deep it was. I was like, 4'11". Are you kidding me? So I pushed a little harder on my tape measure. After all, this is just sand. And I got 5 foot. There we go. 5 foot dug straight up and down. You're supposed to provide some level of protection to an excavation dug deep, 5 foot or more in depth, whether that be sloping it, whether that be putting a box or a shield in there, or whether that be shoring it or providing some sort of support. Now, the reason I tell you the full breadth of that story is just so that I can show you how honest I am, and you can poke holes in my integrity. That son of a bitch. He just pushed. Yeah, well, the point is that he was in a. We also have a rule that says if it's less than 5 foot depth, and there's evidence of movement of the soils, then you also shall provide protection. So, chastise me all you will. Fact is, let's get back to the story. The pipe layer, he was bent over. He had probably primed and put the glue on, pardon me, the coupling that they were about to put the pipe in, just about ready to tell that pipe, that the tail man to push. He's going to line up and give it a quarter turn when a 3 foot long section by 1.5 foot by 2 feet slipped in right on top of him. That's not a whole lot of dirt, really, when you think about it. Anyway, he disappeared. Tailman, who's just looking at this guy, can't be more than 5-6 feet away from him. He's gone. So he jumps on the pile. He starts digging with his hands. He finds his back. He knows that he's got to dig further up. That's how buried he was by 3 foot, by 1.5, by 2 foot shift in that sand. Anyway, grabbed his head, pulled his head up, and remember, I was doing the interview with him, and he says, man, he was just making this sound, and he was blue like that pop can. He pointed at a Pepsi can. I was like, holy smokes, how long was he in there? He's like, I don't know, man. Things were happening so crazy. I'm like, okay, tell me the story. Keep on going, right? And he's like, so, we called 911 or whatever. The police are there and everything. They're trying to get him out of there. They couldn't get him out of there because, even though they had him, his torso and head and stuff was unburied, they couldn't get him out because the pipe was stuck in between his legs because he was straddling the pipe, ready to line it, ready to put it in. So they kind of got to a spot where they could get to it. They got a Sawzall in there, a battery act for a Sawzall. They went and cut the pipe so that they could get the pipe out of there and then release him. And in doing so, he was just wearing running shoes, so they cut a couple of his foot fingers off. I said, foot fingers? I never heard that before. Anyway, that's what he called them, his foot fingers. Cut a couple of his toes off. He was so very angry about that. I remember I was looking at him, sitting on his couch at his house, and I'm looking at this guy, and he's of Middle Eastern descent, but he's gray. Could be more gray. Gray like Neil Saman right here. This is gray. I'm just making fun. But yeah, he was gray, and his eyes, red. You could even see bulged veins and stuff in his neck and the side of his head. It was like a zombie. I'm like, dude, you're lucky to be alive. He's like, I know, but they didn't have to cut my fingers off. I'm like, oh my God. Wow. So it doesn't have to be deep, is my point. 4 foot 11 inches deep, and the dude should have been dead, no question about it. And even the fact that he wasn't dead, he was well worse off. So it doesn't need to be 10 foot, is all I'm trying to impress onto you in that. Now let's see about more impressions. What do you think this building's impression is onto this ground, right? I mean, if this dirt isn't even self-supporting until 45 degrees, then that means there's nothing holding that building up either. And whether it's a building, whether it be a sidewalk, whether it be a roadbed, whether it be a telephone pole, this happens all the time. where people are not considerate. They're just thinking they're focused here on the rule they're breaking, which is enough. But then they forget about all the other things. And I'm going to tell you what, accidents don't happen usually with the breaking of one rule. It's usually a couple of them. They all compound onto themselves. Does he need to have a hard hat? Well, yeah, shucks, I suppose so. For the hazards that he's experiencing here, it's not going to do him a lick of good, but he oughta. He really oughta. Still, he really oughta. And then, quite honestly, I think he should have a strap on that hard hat so it's at least on his head when he does need it. But yeah, you get to see a lot of the things, the access requirements, the support requirements, the support of other and adjacent objects or structures requirement, the spoils pile or the excavated earth or surcharge load, if you want to look at it that way. And in line with that, too, be considerate of the vibrations that might be in and adjacent to your excavation, whether it be live traffic, whether it be your own equipment on the job site. This is why we need these support structures to be done by a qualified person. This is why I also recommend that you keep it simple if you're going to do sloping and go 1-to-1. Try not to get too tricky. You'll see how you can get a little bit tricky here with our rules. But dirt is heavy, and much more heavy is the water that may be in the voids that is typically in the soil. Because typically soil is about half substrate, half void. And some of you may have this experience. Maybe you're doing some landscaping work around the house. You go to Dale's Landscaping and you get a half a yard in your back of your pickup truck of whatever it is. Let's just say dirt, sand, whatever it may be. And you get working on it. It's midday Saturday, and then the boys come over and it's like, hey, man, you going to watch that game with us or what? And then you're like, yeah, but I got to finish this. And then, of course, it rains on Saturday evening, right? And you go out to the truck on Sunday morning and your springs are all shot. Yeah, water's heavy. Here's some of the science if you want to, know. Obviously, substrate has a lot to do with, the weight of the soils, of course. Fact is, it's heavy. So we do require that an ongoing inspection be accomplished by a competent person. Okay, what is this? It says qualified person clearly on the slide here. Well, was it last year? I think it was last year. Might have been the year before that, which would have been like 24, which would have probably preceded the actual development of this class. But it was recently where we fell in line a little bit more with federal OSHA vernacular, if you will. Now, our expectation of what is the obligations of this person to do this ongoing inspection, they haven't changed whatsoever. It's just that we probably shouldn't have been using the word qualified person. We probably really should have been using the word competent person, because just as a general nature, what's a competent person? Sometimes it's a little easier to define that by saying what's an incompetent person. An incompetent person, I know what that is a person you can give all the training and instruction to about what needs to occur. You can give them all the equipment, all the tools, everything that they need, materials and everything, what they need to do. There's really nothing that stands in the way of them accomplishing a task. You ask them to do the task, and then you really just have no idea what's going to happen, right? Can't follow instructions. That's incompetency, as opposed to complete, insubordination. But no, incompetency is just can't follow instructions. Can't not consistently. So a competent person is one that can follow instructions. Okay. Whereas a qualified person is the person that creates instructions because they're qualified to do so. Competency has nothing to do with your qualification. It just means you can follow directions if given an instruction. And so we just do need a competent person on the job site. However, that competent person has to be able to be trained to be able to recognize foreseeable hazards in the associated environment. So in this case, that competent person should be able to kind of detect whether or not maybe water is present in the excavation where it wasn't present originally when they were laid out by whoever told them how we're going to do this job, right? Because the foreman doesn't just go, let me think, how are we going to do this job? Not in the case of these I suppose sometimes just selecting some of the protective devices, whether it be shoring or shielding, but those shores and shields were certainly designed by a qualified person, not just a competent person. You still got to read the instructions how to put it in, but you are versed enough to be able to recognize hazards in the workplace and the appropriate measures in order to correct them. That's competency. So I suppose we were probably a little long arming it before when we had this qualified person language, and it has since been repealed and replaced by competent person. Again, anytime you find conditions that are going to compromise your excavation, all work's got to cease until proper protections are put back in. And again, that may not be up to that competent person to determine. They might have to go to somebody that's capable to design something. They're like, well, no, I recognize the hazard, but I just don't know how to fix it. So again, competent people follow directions. Qualified people are the answer folks. If I got a question, they better have the answers. They're the designer. Oh, here's some more words about what this means. But a qualified person, as you can see, it's just a person who, whether it be by professional recognition or whether it be just with extensive knowledge, they're successfully able to demonstrate their ability to solve and resolve problems related to the subject matter of the work. Again, though, this means typically designers. Competency has the authority and or ability to follow directions. So this is that first rule I was speaking about, the excavation. The retained materials, the spoils pile, got to be at least 2 feet away from the edge of the excavation. Yeah, there's pretty seamless. That's sand. That's pretty easy to tell what that kind of substrate is. You can only tell, though, so much from visual observation. You're going to have to get your hands dirty or be using some sort of an empirical testing device in order to get a true sense of what the substrate really is, pertaining to its unconfined compressive strength. That's what we're really worried about. How much does it cohese together? The more it coheses together, the more straight up and down we can dig this thing. Granular soils, at best, 45 degrees, at best. As you can see, it naturally lays at about a 45-degree angle. It's only using friction in order to stay together. Soils that are finer in texture, like clay, they actually use a lot of hydrostatic tension to stick together. You know, best example as far as how clay is cohesive, it's you ever get 2 laminated pieces of paper and you get one little drop of water maybe on it, and then you put them together. Well, you're not going to pull them apart. You got to slide them apart, right? Same thing that happens to clay. Clay it's a platy, I guess, and the molecules are a little bit more lengthwise or whatever. Anyway, they that's why it's cohesive. I guess I'm not going to get more geologist into that because I'm not a geologist. Oh, another example of spoils pile being right there at the edge. Yeah, again, taking a probably 10-foot deep excavation, making it like 18 feet deep. It's amazing that it's even standing up. Whenever we have a excavation greater than 4-foot depth, that is quite a beautiful excavation there, isn't it? I want to make mention of it after I read this rule, but 4 foot in depth, you got to have a ladder or another method of access egress. But a ladder shall extend at least 3 foot above the top so that you got that handhold. Now, why was I just fascinated here with that excavation? Well, you know, sheesh, they got their protractors out, right? I mean, if I were to guess, I'm going to guess somewhere between 65 and 70 degrees. What do you think? 65, 70 degrees? Probably closer to 70. You know, that's probably not, actually. Probably not the type of angle that we would be needing, just to let you know. What kind of soils is that? Either it's polished sand, because the reason I say this is it looks like a lot of sand, but it must have a significant level of clay to be looking like that. Anyway, again, I can only look at it visually. The excavation itself looks like it's probably not greater than 5 foot in depth. It's probably like 4.5, which is why they got the ladder in there. Well, heck, why don't we just count the ladder rungs? 1, 2, 3, 4, and then it's like half for that bottom rung. So that's like 4.5 feet deep, and that's why they got the ladder in there. So technically speaking, they wouldn't need to have some sort of slope on that excavation until they get to 5 foot in depth. But if they did get to 5 foot in depth, let's just call that, it's definitely got granular soils in it. It's definitely got sand in it. So maybe firm clay, maybe. Firm clay being a little bit more cohesive and dense than medium clay, but not as much as stiff clay. You're never going to find some stiff clay freaking at the surface. There's just no way. And you'll find that 65 and 70 degrees don't even come close to cutting the mustard when it comes to a firm clay. Well, that ladder's not doing them any good up top. Got to get the ladder in the hole. I'm pretty sure the utility gas line or whatever like that don't like you climbing on their ductile iron. That stuff is pretty fragile. It's almost like glass, isn't it? You're familiar with that? Oh, there's a ramp. You can see first off, you can see a number of things in this picture. You see all the various substrate in that soil. You got the sand, where it kind of looks, if I can put my mouse up in here, it kind of looks as a little bit concave in this, or either that or this is bulging. And I'm using these phrases because these are excavation phrases that are also used to identify failures. Typically, a wall excavation will collapse, but how does it collapse? Sometimes there's a bulge and a settling. It kind of looks like maybe it's settled. I don't know. Either way, you got a lot of different substrate. I don't even know, asphalt maybe. It's some sort of rock type substrate or something. But then, yes, the slope, the ramp that they're using to access egress out of here is not sloped appropriately. And certainly it's not provided with a slope or protection vertically, let alone the fact that it's like Vlad the Impaler here. Certainly, if they're the Masons and he's getting to go start placing their block in there, you can remove those impalement protective caps. But I still would recommend you probably move that locational ladder. Here's a nice cross section of some of the elements that we're talking about here. In this case here, we have what looks like about 10 foot deep, 10 foot wide at the base. That's a big excavation. It's got this 2 foot delineating, I guess, the distance and where the spoils pile would be able to be begun to be placed. Again, recognizing that the spoils pile is going to, as it gets taller, is going to get wider. So you don't want to double handle this stuff. Again, trying to get it the heck out of there is always best. Sloping is such a difficult proposition. Such a difficult proposition. All this space. 7.510. What kind of angle is that? Anybody really good with their math? I got my Pythagorean theorem here. Hold on a second. A squared, B squared, C squared. And then I got to find the tangent of. Somebody do that while I talk, okay? No, I'm just kidding. I don't think anybody's going to do it. Anyway, but. Excavation less than 5 foot in depth shall also be protected when the examination of the ground indicates the hazardous earth movement may be expected. I guess that would be what I would rest my laurels on with my 4 foot 11-inch deep hole that I experienced over there in Fox Hill and Mound Road. Here's for all you guys fall asleep. This is the angles at which we're looking at. And as I was saying, firm clay, get you 56. For crying out loud, I have not seen too many crews with protractor on site. So how about we just, Mom always told me, Brian, if you just put half of the effort into doing what I asked you to do, it'd be done by now. Instead of making every excuse as to why you can't, right? How much time and money is that? Making all these damn excuses. Just cut everything off 1-to-1 angle, 1-to-1 ratio, 45-degree angle. Inevitably, as long as we're in an urban area, we're going to be dealing with some sort of a fill. And unless you can get me the data on that engineered backfill, we're going to have to call it as fill. And that's 45 degrees. So that's it. That's facts. And the other thing, too, is, come on, we're not really going to slope now, are we? Really? Unless we're in the big field where there's nothing anywhere. There's no other utilities that might be running perpendicular to our work or adjacent, or there's no streets, there's nobody's yards, there's no trees. It's all wide open here. I mean, it's looking great. But how often do you have this opportunity? Let's be real. Sloping is not a real Or you got a giant machine and you're working out there at M59 and M23 was at Heartland. I think this is the Meyer or whatever at that intersection. Yeah. Oh, by the way, this is not the appropriate way to slope or bench. Pardon me. Because when we bench, we have to replicate the angle of slope that we're supposed to achieve based upon our soil type. Now, if you measure an excavation, you measure it from the toe where the bottom intersects the wall to where the wall intersects grade. And that's right here, right below the G. That's the angle that's supposed to. Now, if we were to bench it the way that the dotted lines show, then I'd have to measure it from the bottom to here. And that's not even close to being the same angle. That's got to be damn near a 70-degree angle right there. So unfortunately, we do have a bad illustration in our standard, which is referenced here. But you got to double back that first bench. And the bench itself cannot create a trench. That's kind of nice and fancy that it rhymes. So for that respect, it can't be more than 5 foot because at 5 foot we have to provide protection. So your benches can't be more than 5 foot, that's for certain. And it also can't be that the double asterisk says in the bottom of the table in the standard, whatever, so it also cannot be taller than your excavation is wide at the base. Can't create a trench when you bench. And this is very unfortunate because as they may try, they're still way out of compliance. You know, they got, I don't know, what is that, 2-foot pipe, 30-inch pipe. So that means we're, let's say 36, 42 inches wide. Then we have our first bench. Well, unless he's a little person, is that right? And I'm not trying to be insulting, but yeah, this bench is like 5 foot tall, at least. And again, you can see all the variety of substrate. It's almost impossible to get an appropriate and consistent benching profile or sloping profile in the variety of substrates. So let's get to things that actually work, not just theoretically. Now, I say that, and I know that a lot of excavators probably want to come fight me when I say that because they're like, oh, I could do this sloping, blah, 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 our work, blah, blah, blah. Okay, fine, fine. But let's just be real. I mean, I'm an electrician turned safety officer, and I see tons of these excavations not cut properly. And the only thing I can figure out is, well, first off, it's a lot faster if you don't slope it out properly. But secondarily, it just all the things that I bring up, it's like, yeah, it doesn't seem to make a whole lot of practical sense because real estate's real estate. Anyway, here's some shoring systems that are put in place. Sometimes, depending on maybe the longevity of the excavation, maybe the substrate. Again, I'm not the qualified person to design these shoring system, so you have to defer to the manufacturer's guidance documents, whatever, as to whether or not you need to put these type of dispersion, weight distribution, things, or whether or not you can go just I almost said something bad, but raw. How about just raw on the walls? The manufacturer tells you. I can't tell you, but it's pretty interesting. Sure, do they get in the way? Yeah, I'm sure. It doesn't look like they're nothing. They're going to be in the way a little bit, and also interestingly, as we keep on seeing these, it makes me say right now, I wish I got to see, or I could find a picture where they're using it in a much deeper hole, like say 10 foot deep, because then, as you can see, these hydraulic shores are pretty much only 3.5 foot in height. They actually have to checkerboard their installation as opposed to having them all the same level in the excavation. So these are, an advent, as you can see, well, not really because it's all scraped off, but this says efficiency. This is from one of the trench box manufacturers here in the state of Michigan. I understand there's 3 different trench box manufacturers all here in the state of Michigan. And quite honestly, it's the truth. You go to other parts of the country, depending on the soil types, like Arizona, they don't know what the heck you're talking about with trench box. What do you mean? They use sheet piling. They use, sheeting and stuff sometimes when they're having excavation is going to be vertical for a long time. But otherwise, they figure out what kind of soils they're going to have, and then they might actually slope it because it's consistent, uniform, and unchanging. So, take some pride in the fact that we got some pretty ingenious technology here when it comes to excavations. Particularly, I know I've gone through my break here, but I just want to kind of complete a little bit of this before I move on. So at the end of this excavational section, if you don't mind, you might be gone anyway. I can't tell. Sports systems got to be designed by a qualified person. Doesn't have to be a person that works for the same company, for crying out loud. I don't know how they were remiss and allowed a word like employee to enter this reg. But design of the support system's got to be maintained. This is some tabulated data for, I don't know, the 6H series of the shield walls for this manufacturer, whomever that may be. But it does list to the depth of the types of soils. Now, interesting, what you'll find is most of these manufacturers will, even though this is a very kind of Michigan-centric kind of problem and product, they do use a federal vernacular when it comes to the types of soils that they provide protection to. Remember that table that I was showing you that I said that you'd be well off to see it if you were laying your head on the table because it had like 7 different angles that you could conform your angle of repose to. Well, federal, they only have A, B, and C, and they say that A doesn't exist, so there's really just B and C, and B's got to be cut at a 45-degree angle. They really make it easy. I like that because, like I said, I don't see too many crews running around with protractors. First off, I'd like to see the design for this support system. It looks like the guy in the orange hard hat's a little skeptical too. Maintain 10 foot of clearance. Can't go excavation topic without bringing that up. Why? And it wasn't a pun on the word up, was because excavators don't look up. And some of y'all might remember Isaiah Thomas reminding us all to look up once upon a time. But yeah, maintain 10 foot of clearance. Simply, if you're having a rough time figuring it out and you don't want to stick your metal tape up there to make sure of it, stand underneath the power line, draw a line in the sand with your foot, and then measure out 10 feet, draw another line, and that'll be your barrier. Now you can look at it with your machine. Crane requirements do require that you visually depict or identify. It doesn't say what. You could use cones, you could use flags or anything, but you have to delineate that 10-foot clearance from overhead power lines per crane standard, which does not cover necessarily excavators and such like that. Well, I got 20 till, and I said I was going to have a break sometime around this point. So let's have a break unless there's any kind of questions. And if you do have any questions, you want to be discreet, I guess there's probably a chat section that you can place that in also, and I'll try to check that too. But I'm planning to come back at 2:50. As long as I see a couple of cameras up, I'm going to proceed at that point. So let's get on to electricity. How far do you got to be away from this stuff? Well, let me say, I guess first things first. The best way to make electricity safe is to turn it off, right? So I want to talk about a couple of things fundamentally. Sure, we got rules and they speak about these concepts, but sometimes just understanding things as a whole. Right? Number one, best way to make electricity safe is turn it off. And the only way that it's ever going to be off is that if it's grounded. Now, we're not necessarily talking about branch circuits and stuff like that, but overhead power lines, they're not off unless they're grounded. And I guess the reason I bring that up necessarily is because we're looking at a picture with things that appear to be overhead power lines. They're not off unless they're grounded. I've looked at a couple of presentations in the last couple of days. I'm pretty sure that this has, I'm actually not so sure actually that it has that information about this fatality I worked on over here in the Edison corridor, where a gentleman ended up losing his life on a de-energized line because of the induced effects from the other side and the inappropriate grounding removal that they did. If we don't come across it soon, I'll tell that story anyway, now that I've teased it. But turn it off. And if it's not grounded, it's not off. So simplicity is often what I will tell the carpenters, because carpenters using equipment all the time, whether it be getting the trusses with a little crane, they got a fork truck picking stuff up and around, and they're not really electrically minded, and they'll believe anything, most of the time, especially if so yeah, it's off. It's not off unless it's grounded. The other thing is, pardon me, back up. Shouldn't press that button. Second, can't turn everything off. If you can't turn it off, stay away. How far? 10 feet. Now, I often tell the guys, this means use some sort of measuring device, because I've noticed that the male sensibility when it comes to length is a little off. So make sure you get the full 10 feet, guys. If it's over 50,000 volts, I often say, stay the hell away, man. It's over 50,000 volts. Just to put you at ease, most of the overhead power lines that you're going to experience in any kind of a urban area are going to be far less than 50,000 volts. It's when you get out into the rural areas, as we're going to start seeing very high voltages, where the second part of this table comes into play, whether it be the UP, just any kind of a rural area, because the concept of voltage, if you're not familiar, and that's fine, not everybody's electrically oriented, but the concept of voltage is pressure. And the reason we use high pressure or high voltage, voltages higher than even 50,000 volts, is to send electricity without losing any along the way. Kind of like the reason you stick your thumb on the end of a hose when you want the water to go further. Same amount of water is coming out the end of the hose, but it's going further. So current, crazy, we call it current, or amperage. Amperage and current is the same. It is the flow of electrons, much like the flow of water molecules. Those are the same. Similarly, the copper wire has to have enough of these electrons to flow without getting too hot. That's where we get into current limiting devices or circuit breakers and things like that. Anyway, that's just a little bit of electricity 101 to kind of talk about voltage. And where you're going to find it is in the transmission areas. So the Edison corridor, yeah, because you're transmitting electricity great distances. But in the distribution end of it, even though you're like, well, that's an auto plant. Well, yeah, I know, but they're not operating at more than 50,000 volts, even into their substation that they might have on site. But regardless of that, it takes less than 15 minutes, even if the operator is confused, to find out exactly what is on the top of a pole. Every pole's got a number on it. And so you call up the utility in your area, whether it be DTE, Consumers Energy, Cherryland Power, or otherwise, and they will be able to tell you what's on there. So you'll be able to know what voltages you're dealing with. But just as a nice rule of thumb, you only have to really remember 10 feet. I hope your spidey senses take over. Otherwise, to say, y'all ought to always know how much the voltage is you're working in and around. But number one, turn it off. It's going to require grounding. Number two, if you can't turn it off, stay away. That means at least 10 feet away. A little bit of math to do if you're dealing with high voltages. The third principle, and I know it's not coming up just yet, ground fault circuit interrupters. It's the only device on the face of the earth specifically designed to protect you against accidental contact with electricity. Period. As I was just saying a second ago, those circuit breakers and your fuses, current limiting devices, that's only there for the protection of the wiring. In fact, the code book, the electrical code book, is called the NFPA 70. It's a National Fire Protection Association document. The whole point of the code book is to make sure that we build structures in accordance with this code to make sure stuff don't burn down, period. It wasn't until 1976, and OSHA became in existence in 1971, basically, and they're like, well, shoot, we got to make rules on electricity. Well, we don't know anything about electricity. How about we talk to the people that do? Well, call up the NFPA. They called up the NFPA and they said, hey, listen, we'd like you to make a document that talks about how to safely work with electricity, both dealing with whatever hazards we're dealing with electricity, which are, quite frankly, arc flash, arc blast, which is when the electricity simply creates a short circuit. An approaching infinity amount of electricity tries to flow in an instant and then go boom, the explosion that occurs sometimes with electrical devices is an arc flash, arc blast event. And then, of course, when you contact a live part and provide it a path for it to go, that's a shock. Those are the major hazards associated with electricity. And so that's what this document, NFPA Appendix E, or sorry, NFPA 70 Appendix E, which is NFPA 70. But the reason I say it like that is because there's an Appendix A, there's an Appendix B, there's an Appendix C, D, and E to the code book. Now, some of them, I think it's D, has to do with distribution and transmission centers, very specific. It's not within the regular code book. Either way, OSHA went and asked NFPA to make a document called NFPA 70E way back in 1976, and then they never went and adopted it anywhere. Crazy. I hope in this PowerPoint it might show. I know that when I do my typical electrical presentations, I show how somewhat inept our rules are to deal with the realities of the NFPA 70E, and that's a great document. That's why I make mention of it so much, is that's truly a document you should be referencing for dealing with safety in the workplace, not so much OSHA rules. The OSHA rules are the law, this is true, but NFPA 70E is far more safety oriented. I brought that up talking about GFCIs somehow. I guess to suggest that the code book deals with overcurrent protection or making wires not catch on fire. Those protected devices don't protect you. The only device is a GFCI. And how does it do it? Actually, it uses magnetic lines of flux that alternating current gives off, which is the magnetism that emits around a wire that is carrying alternating current. So if we have a wire and there's electricity flowing through it, same kind of electricity that's in your walls, and we have a current transformer, which is really just a winding, and it's able to pick up the magnetism that's flowing around the alternating current that's flowing. And if you put, first off, this magnetism is directly proportional to the amount of electricity that's flowing through the wire. And also crazy about it is that if you get a conductive object and you put it in the influence of that magnetic lines of flux, it'll actually induce a voltage in the opposite direction. Crazy magic. It's actually, that's how transformers work. So if you got a computer, you got that black box that you got to plug your black box, and then there's a small wire that goes to your computer. In that black box, it's got a 10-to-1 winding, 120 to 12, and it gets the 120 out of the wall. It's got its magnetism working out of these windings, and then it takes a 10-to-1 ratio winding, and it gets it close, and then it induces electricity without touching it through that second winding, but only at a 10-to-1 ratio, so it's 12 volts. And then it uses capacitors in order to rectify it. We're not getting in there. Probably already made half you go to sleep. But GFCIs, it takes not just one wire to measure how much electricity is going through it. It takes both the black and the white wire, and it puts a current transformer around that so as to measure how much electricity. Well, how does it measure this magnetic lines of flux? And again, one's going out and one's coming back. So on the black wire, 5 amps is going out. 5 amps is coming back. The current transformer reads 0 because it's +5, -5. However, if there happens to be, say, a broken extension cord that's plugged in, and we're working on a slab, and so it's concrete, just dirty water full of rebar, wonderful path to ground, and it was a broken wire, because the electrician took his pallet jack, right? He got 800-pound transformer. He rolls over these pile of cords. He doesn't care. He rolls over them twice just to make sure he damages them, right? And here comes a mason along the way. And masons, they hate it when their cords are broken. It seems like it's a brand new one every time. Anyway, they're also always wet. I don't know why. Either playing in water or working too hard, sweating. I'm not sure. They also need a raise because their work boots always got holes in the toes. You can see his steel toe running out of them. Anyway, he bends over because he's coming around with his pallet of block. He doesn't want to damage the cords that might be the carpenter's. He reaches down, he ends up grabbing that whole bundle, and he touches a black wire that happened to be actually exposed. Not only the outside jacket of the extension cord got damaged, but so did the black wire, exposing the copper, and that mason just happens to touch it. He's dead, unless you're using a GFCI. Why? Because in that whole process, really, really quickly, 0.03 of a second, 1/20th of a second, pardon me, which is 3 cycles, 1/20th of a second, very quickly, But out the black, we'll be going with 5 amps. But because 5 thousandths went through a Mason, then only 4.995 amps is coming back on the white. That current transformer is going to read 5 thousandths of an amp and trip, like I say, in 1/20th of a second, 3 cycles. To that effect, the Mason might feel muscle contractions and pain. But I'm going to tell you, if you're over 30, every time you bend over, you get some muscle contractions and pain. So he don't even know no different. We actually had a situation terribly in Michigan, 2009, where we had a demolition of a metal-studded curtain wall. Now, you guys probably all know that all metal parts of a building that are containing electrical apparatus that are not designed to carry electrical energy, they've got to be bonded to ground. And so when they're tearing out this metal-studded curtain wall in this warehouse to do whatever the heck they were going to do, this guy, he had a Sawzall, he had a crowbar, he had a scissor lift. It's a small area scissor lift with the push-out platform. You're all familiar with it. And you got an extension cord to power a Sawzall. And the Sawzalls, I don't know if you noticed, they're generally, a lot of the time anymore, double insulated. Now, sometimes people are, what does that even mean? I heard that term and stuff. And, well, you notice it's only got 2 prongs on the trailing cord of the tool. And that's just because it has no ground. And you're thinking, wait a second, aren't we in the 21st century? Doesn't everything need to be grounded? Right. Well, what do you ground? You ground metal components that are not designed to carry electricity, right? Like the exterior shell of your refrigerator or stove or something like that. Those would all be bonded to ground because, hell, if one of the live wires ever got loose inside that equipment, it would energize the whole damn thing, and that's not good. But these Sawzalls we're using nowadays and whatnot, they're doubly insulated. They're not made out of metal shell. There's all plastic shells. So, and the components in the side there are all doubly insulated so that they cannot pose that risk to you, and therefore there wouldn't be anything to attach the ground wire to. So therefore, it doesn't have a ground wire on the end of a trailing cord. But more importantly to this story that I'm telling you is that in my experience, every time you use a double insulated tool with an extension cord, you plug it in. All you got to do is just turn around, and there's a gap. You know, a little gap. It's almost like you need the ground prong to keep the damn things together. Well, this guy, obviously, there's a gap. It's sitting on the toe board of the push-out platform, energizing the lift at 120 volts, 20 amps, I suppose, if you will. So what? Anyway, it's like August, and he's probably wearing a T-shirt, probably perspiring. Doesn't really matter whether he's wet or not. But he's leaning on the rail of the lift, and he puts his crowbar up into the wall to pry out a piece. And as soon as he makes contact with that grounded wall, because the lift is energized at 120 volts, it goes up through his belly, through his vital organs, out his hands. He's dead. What? If he was using a GFCI, as soon as he made contact with that crowbar, the 5 milliamps would have went through him and stopped going back on the white. GFCI would have tripped. He might have got muscle contractions and pain when he made contact with that wall. He wouldn't have noticed no difference. He would have bent over, picked up his Sawzall, went to cut the piece out, pulled the trigger a couple of times, and what would he have said? I'm sure some of you have said it yourselves. God damn these stupid GFCIs. Can't get your damn job done. They're always tripping. Now, they don't seem to trip as much anymore. I've had people ask me that. They say, Brian, have they changed the technology in these GFCIs? Because when we first started using them in the 90s, man, they were tripping like all the day. They don't seem to trip so much anymore. I said, no. You just got rid of all your shitty tools and shitty cords that used to leak, basically. You know? And also, too, to that concept, every time you take a plug and cord attachment and you plug it together, that's an imperfect connection. It's not a solid wire. And so every time you plug another darn extension cord into another extension cord, you're giving an opportunity for leakage. So that's definitely going to cause more, quote, nuisance trips that are going to be not helpful to the whole, embracing GFCI. So literally and theoretically by law, even though it's not imposed, it's actually, there's a tag when it comes with the extension cord by the manufacturer that says you're not supposed to plug extension cords together. You're supposed to only plug them into the wall, into a trailing cord of a tool. That's it. You're not supposed to daisy chain cords. It says so. Again, it's not very well enforced. we're not trying to create tons of enemies out there all the time, but you know, we can mention these type of things. Also, too, if you're going to mention it, might as well. You ought to use 12 gauge cords. You really ought to use 12 gauge cords, period. Man, this 20 amp breaker, you plug it in a 20 amp receptacle. Now I know it's not a dedicated circuit or anything like that, but you wouldn't be able to freaking carpenters putting 13 tools on that one cord. If it's a 14 gauge cord, it's going to get hot. And that doesn't mean it's going to fail immediately, but that means you're compromising not just the insulation of those conductors, but the exterior. And I know it's easy for me to spend money, but 12 gauges cords are more durable. It's not enforced. It really ought, it could be, because all circuits have to be capable of withstanding or carrying the overload protection that they're provided with. And if you got 20 amp breakers, just saying, it's a temporary branch circuit. That's the way we look at extension cords. It's temporary branch circuit. So it has to live up to same things like a branch circuit would. Just for a simple bad idea of this. Sorry, I went on this whole GFCI thing. We're not even looking at GFCIs. We're still talking about staying away. 10 feet. If you're going to store things under power lines, I would suggest you don't. But by law, you can. If you add 10 feet plus the length of the material, most of your stocks say 10 feet anyway, so I don't know how high you think these power lines are in the first place, but it's a bad idea. And I was just doing this class down there in the Detroit Training Center, and there are heavy equipment operator learnees or in training. And I was talking to them about this fatality I worked on over in Romulus, right? It was just up right by the airport, where you know, I don't know what kind of company, what the name of the company was. It was like a recycling company, like a Denverno or type thing, where the truck driver, young kid, he comes on the job site. He's like, "Yo, I got your empty box here. Where do you want it? Because I'm picking up your full one." And superintendent, like most superintendents, got two phones to his ears, right? And the guy's standing there waiting for him to talk, and he's like, "Over there." And he goes over there because there's nothing over there. And the reason there's nothing over there is because it's underneath power lines. But you know, he's busy. He's not trying to hurt nobody, but he just forgot. And so this kid literally went over there, put the fuck thing up into the lines, and he's dead. It was just horrible. It was horrible. Like he was literally still smoking in the field when I arrived on the job. It was horrible. It's horrible. You know, if only in the beginning of the job we'd scope the place and then put signs underneath the power lines just to remind us. Because if that was the case, I'm pretty sure the superintendent with the two phones to his ears and a guy standing there waiting to talk to him, he would have done the same thing. Well, put it over. Oh, shit. Can't, because he sees a sign. He's like, Renaud, hey man, I gotta call you back. And he would have taken care of it. That's what signs are for. It's to remind us. And quite frankly, generally speaking, it's the hardest workers who are the ones that are getting hurt. They're working hard. They sometimes forget about things, and that's exactly what signs are helpful for. They're not complete protection, but they're good reminder. And the simple fact is by law, you can't store things underneath power lines. It's just a very, very, very bad idea. And then if it's difficult, just to boot, if it's difficult for you to maintain the appropriate distance, you can use a spotter to help you maintain that distance. Oh, again, please you shouldn't be doing it, but it's not prohibited. Licensed electrician by the state of Michigan. I think it's actually, to me, I think it's an overstepping of OSHA jurisdiction. We shouldn't be. We're the only state that has a requirement that all installations have to be installed by a licensed electrician under supervision of a licensed. Regardless, we do have a rule in the state of Michigan that does require this. Again, though, what does it mean to be under the supervision of a licensed electrician? That's what I was alluding to with the journeyman to apprentice ratios, which, well, that's again outside of our jurisdiction, to be honest with you, to enforce. But here's the first rule. Mama always told me, and I already told you what she said: just put half the effort into do and ask you to do, be done by now. But we could, or we have two rules that talk about all temporary power sources. This is not part of permanent building wiring, have to be GFCI. So extension cords have to be provided with GFCI protection. And there's various types of Certainly, we have another rule that talks about anytime you're in a wet environment, then you have to use GFCI as well. So if you're in the realm of construction, why are you wasting your time thinking about whether or not you need to use a GFCI? If I've just told you that you need to use a GFCI every time you use an extension cord or in your wet environment, man, just use it 100% of the time. Otherwise, you're just wasting my time and money thinking about it, right? Also, and I'm not trying to offend anybody, just make sure I wake you up if you are starting to doze, but I also say treat your GFCIs like you treat your underwear. Use your own. You don't know what other people are doing with their GFCIs. As far as I know, that painters are soaking their GFCIs in water at night. Don't they soak everything in water at night? But this is the only device specifically designed to protect you against accidental contact with electricity. I think there should be a certain amount of intimacy with it. I can't require that, but I can emphasize that. And this guy was like filming himself wash his brand new red Jeep in his driveway. And he's all, washing it with the water and making it all pretty and stuff like that. I guess he was home from summer vacation or something from college. And he wasn't wearing flip-flops or anything like that, which was kind of a contributory factor. But, the ground's all wet and everything like that. And he went and he plugged in this shop vac. And as soon as he flipped that switch, he was all shaking and flopping around on the ground. And that's completely legitimately possible. Using electrical vacuums, shop vac you're on is ground, it's wet and you create wet things. Not all homes have GFCIs installed, depending on the age of the installation and whatnot. But again, I wasn't really telling you that so much for that, but just to express the just nonsensical nature of these type of fatalities and injuries. And usually that's the problem. It doesn't usually result in an injury. It usually results in a fatality. We're talking about electricity here. So if you can wield, pardon me, the number one or the only device that can protect you against accidental contact with the stuff, I reckon, other than turning it off, which is rule number one, other than staying the heck away, which is rule number two, if you're going to use it, you might as well use a GFCI regardless of what our rules say. Here, there's the portable electrical tool in a wet environment. I don't know how they missed the wet environment in this paraphrasing, which they did, because that's actually what the rule says. Portable electrical tools shall be provided a GFCI when used in a wet environment. And this also does include some very large machines. The largest and most contentious application of this rule that I can think of is the block cutters or other masonry type saws that are electrically driven. Might be a 240, 50 amp, have a dedicated breaker, little disconnect right above the station where that saw is being operated at. Is it portable? Well, it's kind of stationary here. It's not, but just let you know, those OSHA guys, they'll call it portable just to get you. And the fact is there is a GFCI, 240, 50 amp GFCI, about $300. Yeah. But there is still a hazard too. Just because, and even if we're applying a portable denotation to something that could be successfully argued as a stationary equipment and thus fall outside the rules, you use an electric piece of equipment with water and you're standing probably on the ground. I think there's a pretty reasonable explanation as to why a GFCI would still be a strong argument. Why is a GFCI a strong argument for cords, extension cords, as opposed to just maybe we're plugging our extension cord into the permanent building wiring? Why do I need a GFCI when I use the extension cord? Because the extension cord is exposed to damage. It's out here. The wire in the wall is not likely to get damaged. We don't need GFCI for that, unless it's in a wet environment, of course. Why you have it in bathrooms and in the kitchens. So again, just probably too much, but just want to make sure I make it all the way to 4 o'clock. Extension cord's got to be protected against damage, have a plug body that is designed to prevent strain to the terminals. So, what does that mean? Well, they didn't do this properly, because if they would have, there's a little gripper, for lack of a more technical term, that keeps this from pulling on the wires that are put underneath the little screws that are attached to the prongs here. Right now, there's tension, strain being applied to those terminations. That's no good. And that's why we have to have, obviously either a molded connection or a properly clamped or strain relieved connection. In a drill, sometimes you see that conical flex grip. It kind of does a little bit of both, does that strain relief as well as providing a durable flex point. If you do happen to have a damaged cord, I know some people refer to this yellow portion here as insulation. That's not insulation. It's flexible conduit. Quite frankly, it's of a duty rating. What's duty rating? It means that it can be exposed to a certain amount of physical contact. Every cable has a different, well, not every cable, but there's a variety of different duty ratings for, let's just be real, calling it flexible conduit. It's just the physical protection. It's just like plastic. So we have flexible plastic conduit. We have flexible metallic conduit. We have, Schedule 40, Schedule 80 type plastic pipe. There's lots of different types of things that are used to protect, but it's not insulation. It's physical protection. Now that the insulation is exposed, well, shoot, what do we use for insulation? I know we don't use asbestos. So as long as we don't use asbestos, that means that it's going to break down, right? Kind of a joke. People are like, what is he talking about? Is he being serious about using asbestos? Well, it doesn't break down, does it? Anyway, the problem with poly, rubber, other things like that are typically going to be insulation is that, yeah, when exposed to UV radiation, when exposed to changing temperatures, when exposed, it's going to break down. So now that you've damaged the protection, you can't just wrap black tape on that and call it good. You can get a 3M shrink wrap kit, probably costs more than an extension cord, but, maybe it's got, sentimental value to you, I guess. I don't know, but black tape doesn't work. And contrary to a lot of people's belief, black tape is not electrical tape, okay? And I don't want to get colorful with my language, but it's not, let's just say it's not Scotch 33 plus, because that stuff's expensive. We're using pretty cheap stuff, by and large, with the black tape that you see as far as electricians are concerned. So when people start talking about insulative value of tape, I'm just like, I'm out of the conversation at that point, because they don't know what the hell they're talking about. Again, unless we're doing the whole, actually doing a proper butt splice and using actual insulated tape, stuff's expensive. But protected against damage. We got some pictures here. We're at the end of a saw there. Obviously, somebody had, looks like, ripped off that little conical strain relief flexi thing here that's typically used. Oh my gosh, they're using Romex as an extension cord. I've never seen that before. Huh. Yeah, you can't do that. It doesn't have a duty rating. The duty rating of Romex is to be used inside the darned walls. Now, I know that there's an article, I don't even know what it is anymore, temporary installations, that allows for quite extensive use of Romex. Not as an extension cord. How about that? They do make these fancy gadgets that create this like super protection for cords. Now, I'm not unrealistic, and I don't expect this type of thing. Certainly, if there's vehicular traffic and such like that, even for lifts and stuff, that'd be a wise idea. Typically, our safety officers really are actually looking for evidence of the damage before they start saying that you're not properly protecting it. I know there's best practices of like, keeping all extension cords like up off the ground, like in hangers and stuff. And I've seen it done successfully, and then I've seen it done looks like a freaking haunted house or something like that too. So there's no panacea or solution for it all, but we want to recognize that we do have physical protection in our SO cord or extension cord jacketing, but it's not rigid conduit either. Extension cord got to be 3-wire type, period. Doesn't matter even if you are using it with 3 or with double insulated tool or anything. You still got to have a path to ground. If you're, really paying attention, you happen to notice that this guy here has got one of these fancy receptacle testers. It tests to make sure that the electrician doesn't have it reverse polarity or maybe floating aground or something like that. It also has a little button here that helps test if it's a GFCI. Because often the electrician might say, "Oh yeah, no, there's no GFCI here, but it's up in the panel, and the panel's like on 6, and it's in a locked room and stuff." And you just believe me. Yeah, my fourth lesson to everyone is never believe an electrician. So you plug one of these little guys in there and you press the button, and then when it doesn't turn off because it ain't GFCI or there's not even a ground, maybe potentially that allows that thing to make a little fall short, then you offer to buy them a cup of coffee in the parking lot. Usually solves things. Anyway, we have a regulation that restricts exposure to voltages operating greater than 50 volts. Where the hell did they come up with that? I mean, the wall basically has got 120. I know people call it 110, but it's got 120 in it. What other? Oh, batteries, right? Like 9-volt battery. Anybody ever take a battery and stick it to their tongue? If you never did, then I would just suggest that you don't have a very good father. But that's pretty good, eh, Maurice? But voltage again is pressure, and the reason you feel it in your tongue is because you don't have your leathery out, epidermis on your tongue. It's wet, it's thin, so it doesn't take a whole lot of pressure to get the electrons to start flowing across there, and you're getting enough to get some tingling sensation. It's not burning, but you're getting some tingling sensation, and you put that on your fingers, you're not going to get anything. I've often been nervous when I go to the AutoZone and I see all those car batteries. They're big, right? And it's like 12 volts. I'm thinking, can I touch both of those? Because I've dropped a wrench across a battery. Anybody ever dropped a wrench across a battery? You're like, holy smokes. You're like, I just was touching that. That's scary as Well, it's only 12 volts. Now, I'll ask anybody in here, has anybody ever stuck their tongues across that? Promise. You're in the wrong business if you are. Just saying. If you did, it's a bad joke. It's a bad joke, but that's a long way. 50 volts was what the U.S. Navy actually figured was the natural unbroken dry epidermis of an adult male. And it had something to do with their nuclear submarine tech when they were doing stuff like that. Anyway, yeah. So, yeah, that's why you get a buzz when you stick your finger in the 120. And that's why also you can work with control wiring that might be a 24 volt or 12 volt or something like that. And you can do that with wide open splices. It's hot. It's connected to the panel. Nobody cares. Just don't put it in your mouth, Even low voltage wiring, you might see at some art galleries or at the local bar, and you're sitting there in your drunken stupor looking up at that shiny light. It's just hanging from a wire, and you're like, is that the suspension wire? Is that the electrical wire? It's both. And it's bare. Oh my goodness, it's just low voltage. So it doesn't have the force to be able to push electrons through you, because the electrons moving from atom to atom to atom to atom, that causes atomic friction. That causes heat. That's why they say it cooks you. Because if you get that happening enough, it cooks you. It's the current that kills you. It's the voltage that overcomes your protection. That's why we use gloves and things that are better than just our dry skin. Greater than 50 volts. So that's what we're looking for is the threshold. Which does cause me to get concerned with this battery technology. I saw some sort of riding lawnmower on batteries. I'm pretty sure that voltage has got to be getting up there, to be able to do that kind of work, because work, or watts, is voltage times amps. And so amps is the size of the wire, and you can only pretty much get size of your wire be the size of your finger if you're going to be pushing somebody around on a lawnmower. So that means the voltage also got to get way up there. So then battery voltage has got to be getting 60-something volts, which makes me start thinking all of a sudden a cracked battery, let alone the chemical injuries that are present and the fire hazards that are present with batteries, just the sheer electrical hazard of batteries, because we're starting to put these cells in series and get higher and higher voltages in order to perform an incredible amount of work. Anyway, that's a story for another day, I guess. But you got to guard your panels. And how do you properly guard your panels? You got to have either the dead front, which is what you see in the front or in the right-hand side picture, or the entire cover. Often we don't put the entire cover on, at least until you're ready to turn it over to the customer, because you don't want it all dinged up. and painted on and stuff like that. So the dead front, it might take some abrasion and some, but it's durable. You see, it's physically, you can't get into the electrical parts. I mean, you can go ahead and try to stick your fingers in it and behind there, and you can get yourself hurt. But for all intents and purposes, that's a dead front. You will see conventionally sometimes this cardboard situation where people are like, well, no, I'm putting this on here because I got to take it on and off, take it on and off and on. Well, first off, you shouldn't be working on stuff hot. So I don't want to get into your whole process, but you got to have a dead front or something that's not only capable of taking the electrical hazard or be dielectrically insulated to deal with the electrical hazard, or it must be durable enough to prevent any kind of contact. And you may see some of these, I call them corrugated plastic covers, where they're like provided by like sign companies and stuff. They'll have magnets all the way around the edges. You can get them ordered for all the panels that you got, so they're properly sized for the panels, and you can stick them on top there. It has danger, live electricity, blah blah blah. All this is great. Unfortunately, those are not covers. You would still have to put that on top of the dead front. What you see here, it says correct. Okay. Because that has no durability either. It relies upon the dead front for its durability. That sign is literally just a sign, because you do have to also indicate the presence of electricity where employees could accidentally come into contact with them. That's it? That's terrible. Oh, I'm sorry. One of the other things I wanted to make mention, well, I guess I did mention it, but the same rule that requires us, as I was speaking here, to provide signs for electrical installations that employees could accidentally come into contact with, that's how we also apply a requirement to put signs underneath power lines, as I was kind of referring to with my Isaiah Thomas reference and the kids underneath that maple tree about looking up. Having signs underneath power lines, because your employees can accidentally contact. That's not the plan, of course, but that's what accident calls, right? They don't call them on purposes. So putting signs, we could still even though there's not a specific rule that pretty much says put signs underneath overhead power lines, it says you have to identify with signs any electrical installations that your employees could come into contact with, which I'd say includes overhead power lines. It's funny how much accolade I got when I told a couple of my cohorts about that, and they said, Bryan, you're absolutely right, because nobody ever writes that, because nobody ever doesn't have like a very specific rule. I said, well, I don't know, I just got tired of people putting shit into them, so I kind of made this rule that, I don't know, kind of doesn't not say that. All right, well, I got a half hour. I can't believe it. I did this so easily. It wasn't even, oh man, I might even have to go longer. You guys don't mind staying to 4:30, right? Admin's like, no way. Fall protection. All right, I'm going to do it now. This is crazy. Those emphasis programs I was talking about were showing at the front there at the beginning with the struck by, or the work zone awareness, and then the excavation safety, slope it, short, shield it, and then fall protection. Well, it's stop falls, save lives. Why? What was that percentage? Anybody remember? 38, I think it was, something like that. But falls are the number one cause of death and serious injury in our industry. It's obvious. Everybody knows it. So we've been on that campaign since 2012, Stop Falls, Save Lives. And again, not again. I told another class this yesterday, but what do you think has happened to the industry or the rate of fall fatalities across the nation in construction? Up, down, stay the same? I mean, you'd hope. OSHA's running around the whole country for more than a decade. You'd hope the numbers would come down, right? Nope. Nothing's happened to them, actually. It's almost like we ain't doing anything. So that's like the end of the story. The beginning of the story is I went out on a date one time. I don't know. Do we have enough time for this? And just kidding. I was on a date with this girl, and we're at the Chick-fil-A. That's where I take all the best ones, of course. All this is just jokes just to make me look macho, okay? But we're looking at this guy. He's standing on a 10-foot step ladder. He's probably about at the 7th step. So that's pretty darn high. I mean, you're thinking to yourself, is it all opened up? Are the locks in place? Is it on a nice, stable base? Absolutely. It's on the concrete sidewalk. It's opened up, locked. Got a guy even holding the bottom of the ladder. And he's got this hammer drill. He's drilling the exterior brickwork. He's probably an electrician putting in a sensor or light or something like that. I don't know. I said to the girl, girl, see any problem like that? Just like that, I said to her. You see any problems with work activities there? You got any concerns? And she says, well, yeah. He's not wearing his hat, his helmet thingy. And I kind of chuckled and I was like, his hard hat? And she said, yeah. And I said, well, I mean, there's really nobody working above him. Nothing can really hit him in the head. I mean, I suppose maybe the hammer drill could bite, maybe smack him in the side of the head, but we don't really require hard hats for that. And before I could even finish that statement, she says, I ain't talking about that. I'm talking about when he falls off the ladder. And I actually belly laughed. Oh, just like Maurice, just like that. I'm like, man, this girl don't know anything. That's not what a hard hat's for, I said. Besides, when he falls out the ladder, the hard hat's probably going to fall off his head too, right? And defeated in that logic and the fact that I'm a professional in the matter, she relented her argument. Yeah, she gets it. And I couldn't stop thinking about it. We ended up watching this other guy walking across this roof line with like maybe a 2-inch parapet. And she couldn't believe the confidence this guy's got. And I'm like, I know, right? Because like I trip all the time. Not all the time, but every once in a while it happens for no reason. I just trip. I was like, this guy does this every day. So he's like one trip away every day from buying the farm. Anyway, I got thinking about this girl talking about falling off a ladder and stuff. And I thought about every time I tell somebody about what I do, they say, oh, so you do like investigations on like fatalities and stuff, huh? Mm-hmm. What's the worst shit? They always want to know, what's the worst shit you ever seen? That's easy. It's when they don't die. I mean, when they die, be real, it could be bad. But when they don't die, and they're like irrevocably changed, screwed up in the head, and and you're looking at the family or the wife particularly, and you're thinking, God dang. They're young, and she got to make the decision every single day whether or not to stay with this nightmare. I mean, that's when my heart breaks. And it's nuts because I only worked on one fall fatal. It was a 27-year-old kid in Clawson, and they were flipping this bungalow, and he was tearing off the aluminum siding off the house, probably about 11 feet in height. And he's using a straight ladder, and he's straddling the fence, so it's a little bit shallow, if you will. I figure his feet's got to be about 7.5 feet if he's tearing off the piece at 11. Anyway, you're not supposed to push or pull when you're on a ladder, and he pulled it, and it dislodged the ladder, and he fell on top of that corner, that knobby thing, on the corner post of the chain link fence. So, and he dead in an hour. So he basically fell 3.5 feet and dead in an hour. 27-year-old young buck like that. How? But that was my only fall fatal. I was a couple of falls I worked on. One was at auto show where this guy they were putting in some glass into the VIP section of the Nissan exhibit, and so glass is heavy and stuff. So they took the back guardrail off this lift so they could just like slide it in. And then after they were done that, they parked the lift, and a couple hours later, the foreman said to the guy, "Hey, remember that lift you were using earlier? Take this rag, take this Windex, polish up the Nissan sign. We're out of here." All right. Sounds like a dangerous job, don't it? Well, he's sitting there polishing off the Nissan sign. Again, remember the back guardrail was taken right off, and he walked off the end of that guardrail. He was only about 11 feet or 12 feet up off the ground. He was still in an induced coma when I finished my inspection in March. I'm pretty sure it didn't work out best for him. And another guy in Farmington who was an iron worker there at 14 feet. He fell. Anyway, I don't want to get too much into it. I'm already telling a lot of story here. But he was also flown out to some closed head injury place. There was so many, and it blows me away because I started thinking about my very first job I ever had as an electrician. It was a West Windsor cogen, and I'm drilling holes in strut on the slab. We're building a power plant, and I had a ponytail. I don't know if you noticed. I didn't get this when I was old. I had this my whole life, and anyway, whenever I bent over to drill the holes in the strut, my hard hat would fall off. And my GF came out to me, and he says, "Bryan, I'm watching you from the trailer and drilling the holes in the strut, and every time you drill a hole in a strut, your hard hat falls off, and, well, it's not going to protect you if it's not on your head. So I want you to wear this." And he's got this little bungee chin strap thingy, and I must have looked at him 2 or 3 times, and I thought, man, is he serious? Because he's going to make me a job site dork. You know what I mean? I got this chin strap on my hard hat. I was young. I was cool. I was working construction. I didn't want to look like a dork. Anyway, the problem is that I had that attitude. I remember watching Taipei 101 being built on Discovery Channel and stuff and watching the job. And I was like, well, look at those hockey helmets. They're a bunch of dorks, you know? I work for OSHA. And I'm a lifelong construction worker. And you know what? That's exactly why we haven't made a dent in the incidences of fault fatalities in our industry, because we ain't talking about the right damn thing. We're talking about guardrails and safety nets and personal follower assistance. While that's necessary, the fact of the matter is 25%, this is not a lie, 25% of fatalities and significant injuries in construction are head injuries from falls. A quarter. And I laughed at a girl who didn't even know what it was called. But she could see it. She could see the hazard. That's what I was talking about. As with all of our experience and our expertise, we can always learn. That's a pink elephant in the room. In fact, the hard hat is declared the sign of safety, ain't it? And really, it's nothing more than a phallic symbol, something to call us cool. Because it only protects you from straight contacts. I mean, that was the whole idea back in the Hoover Dam thing. And I tell you, you go on job sites today and they start, and because the general contractor, he don't want to get caught up in any kind of third-party liability. And if you're telling me that 25% of the liability situations in this whole industry come from head injuries from falls, yeah, god dang right, I'm going to make that a requirement on my job, because you'll be not suing me, right? It's just, well, anyway, general contractors do it, and the personnel out there in the field, they're kicking and screaming because it's not cool, I guess. What a terrible reason to not want to do something. But anyway, that's my crusade. And the reason it is because I was so embarrassed with myself. These guys here on this picture, they'll be the first ones to tell you they don't need hard hat. You're right. You don't need a hard hat. You need a helmet. Because I'll tell you what, roofers, I mean, I guess you could break your neck and you could break your arm, and that's bad stuff. But I'll tell you, a large majority of the roofers that die are probably because they smoked their head. I told that story about my date to Ram. You guys are familiar with Ram. I know I'm pushing up to it. But Ram actually ended up calling me a month later. Vince Griffin, he calls me up. He says, hey, Bryan, we just spent more than $250,000 on those hard hats you were talking about. I said, Vince, you know that's not a regulatory issue, right? I was just telling a story. He's like, well, that's a pretty good story. No shit. Love it. And then he calls me up in July that same year, and he says, Bryan, we're going to need some training, a remedial fall protection training over at the airport. I'll tell you more about it when you get out here. So I get out there. We're walking out to the parking deck. He goes, yep. Had a girl go 18 foot in the hole in the concrete parking deck. Broke her femur. We're going to hold off on the party at least until she recovers from her femoral injuries a little bit more, because she knows, and everybody else here knows, that she's otherwise fine because we went to that policy to the class 2 headwear. Right? I mean, if you fall 18 feet, 20 feet in a whole concrete parking deck enough to bust your femur and you're wearing a regular hard hat, good luck to you. Conti Electric, same thing. They had 4 electricians in the first 6 months of 2024. 2 fell off ladders after they got a shock, which is another issue entirely. But another one tripped on ice walking into the damn job site. All of these people hitting their heads on asphalt and or concrete. Another one just trips over some dunnage on the job site. No recordable injuries. I defy you to find 4 other folks that are wearing regular hard hats that will experience those things, and not at least one of them is going to be irrevocably changed. So it's remarkable to me that there's no OSHA movement on this, because it's too expensive to obligate the industry to this requirement. And when I tell even my most conservative friends, and believe it, I have some, they go, what? The cost? What's the cost that we're losing on 25%? That's insane. Yeah, anyway, that's fall protection. Whether it be ice cleats, because we don't talk about ice cleats, and that's how we slip and trip all the time. That's fall protection. whether it be head protection, because that's what's busting us. It's not pelvic fractures. It's not femoral fractures that are killing us. It's not broken wrists. Anyway, let's get to some of this fall protection. I'll get off my soapbox. But your head's about the consistency of a watermelon. That's why falls from 11 feet usually result in death 50% of the time. I figure the other 50% of the time they got hurt, because I never heard of somebody reporting a fall from 11 feet that they didn't get hurt. It's just the way stats can be kind of skewed. You know what I mean? 50% of the time you're dying from 11 feet. I don't really buy that. And the problem is because it's only about reportables. And that's why recording injuries and illnesses is so darn important. We all heard the phrase garbage in, garbage out. If we don't capture where actual injuries are occurring due to non-reporting, then we're going to have terrible rules. And the same thing is when you try to draw some conclusions with your stats, you only get what's told. Like I fell out of a treehouse one time and I didn't get hurt. So what did I do? I looked around, make sure nobody was laughing. That's about it. You know, if I'd have busted my leg, we'd all have known about it. You know what I mean? If I'd have died, we'd all have known about it. Either way, don't get caught up too much with some of these stats. Just like we can physically recognize them. That's a heck of a scene there. You got a ladder on a scaffold. You got these. Looks like they might be scaffold grade planks. I got to give it to them on there, but they're not cleated or otherwise secured. It doesn't look like it's even a complete deck. You got to complete the decks. You can't have holes in your deck 9.5 inches because 9.5 inches is enough to get a board in there. At least they have appropriate access because it looks like they got ladder section in that scaffold. I call those window scaffold, window bracket scaffolds as opposed to walk-through or mason's deck or mason's kind of scaffold. The ones with the window in it. There's just ladder. They're not supposed to be bearers. They're not supposed to hold the deck. Either way, you can't put a ladder on a scaffold, crying out loud. Fall protection is broken up to 3 major categories. The duty to have fall protection, systems criteria, or how do you build the fall protection? You know, guardrails 42 inches plus or minus 3 inches, 200 pounds capable outward, downward thrust, 5,000 pounds for an anchorage for your personal fall arrest systems. You know, you can't fall more than 6 feet. That's a duty to have fall protection. Every circumstance, location, and work activity seems to have a different 501 or duty, or I like to call them just excuses. Because quite honestly, when they made these rules, each NAICS code decided to take up their umbrage with the static concept of having the 3 conventional methods of fall protection at 6 feet. 3 conventional being guardrails, safety nets, personal fall arrest systems. Why? Because they keep you from hitting the ground. A monitor doesn't do that. It just kind of warns you. A monitor is just a person standing there watching you work. A flag system isn't really comprehensively capable of stopping you from falling off a roof or any kind of surface. It's just there to warn you, 6 feet away from the edge. And if you're not a roofer, 15 feet away from the edge. Really, it's just nonsense. Just nonsense. You might, and I already let the horse out of the barn or whatever you say. But I'm Canadian. I don't think Canadians are smarter than Americans. I'm just going to put it out there like that because I'm in public. But anyway, they don't use all the damn excuses that we do over here. I do have some sneaking suspicion, though, it has something to do with the way they pay for the consequences. But let alone that, they somehow solve the problems. Because why? The mother of all inventions is necessity. And if we make an excuse for every damn reason, then you're never going to come around. You're never going to figure it out. Anyway, we got some really bad rules, in my opinion. But at very minimum, it's at 6 feet. You got to do something. You got to do some sort of fall protection that's going to be found in our standard. You got to make sure that all work surfaces are capable of being walked on. This is not one picture. This is actually 2 pictures, because otherwise it looks like, what the hell am I looking at? The one top picture is looking straight above at a roof, a metal decking, and obviously they're replacing the metal decking, yeah? I mean, that's the course of the work anyway. It's so shot, and then somebody fell through the thing. I got an idea. How about before this job even gets going, we string a net on the bottom of the bar joist all the way around the inside of this joint. Sound good? Yeah, but it's not conventional. In fact, if you even started to speak about safety nets to most folks, they're like, what are you talking about? Yeah, just because it's not conventional doesn't mean it doesn't suit purpose. It just means that usually, unfortunately, in construction, we always go to the bulletproof jacket, walking through an active gun range. What do I mean by that? PPE. It's the dumbest idea ever. But that's what we do in construction every damn time. Every damn time. Not, passive fall protect. We all harness and lanyard that stuff. Well, you know how fallible that is? There's another one. I guess it looks like somebody fell through a skylight or a similar type of situation as this, but they're two separate pictures. Obviously, the employer is obligated to provide fall protection. There's a whole bunch of different locations, or like I say, excuses. Leading edges is not what you might think it means. Leading edges is like decking activities, or where the work progresses such that to create the next area from where you're going to work from. And the reason we deal with that as a separate issue is because you can't just put a guardrail on a leading edge. You'd be taking it down every time you go to put another piece in. So there's an exception within that paragraph of activity. Hoist areas, it basically says if you take the guardrail down, then you got to put a harness and lanyard down. Well, yeah. Holes, you got to cover them. The holes covered got to be capable of 2 times the maximum intended load. What are you planning to drive across here? Is it just pedestrians, or are there lifts? How big is the hole? Because we all know the larger the surface area, the more strong something covering that section might be. It might probably be better just to do it with the guardrail, depending on the size of the hole. Formwork, reinforcing steel, really what we're talking about is like vertical workplaces where you might use a positioning device in conjunction with fall arrest, because you still have to be protected from falling at greater than 6 feet. And the singular positioning device is not enough, because what if you miss? I mean, it's so obvious. And obviously you can't work in fall arrest because you can't lean into it. So it needs a combination of the two systems when you're working 6 feet above on a vertical surface like that. Excavations, I almost don't even want to tell you what it says, but it basically says if you can see a wide open excavation, there's no fall protection required. And that's based on the concept that you're going to be sloping it, I guess. Because if you're at the edge of a well, pit, or shaft-like structure, which I would say is generally vertical and reinforced and it doesn't move, and a trench box is different than those because a trench box moves, which is why we don't have requirements for fall protection at the top of a trench box. But if you had a big old sheet piled hole in the road, that's an excavation. It's a pit, well, shaft-like structure because it's reinforced, it's vertical, and it's not moving. You have to have a guardrail at the top of that excavation. Fair? Dangerous excavation, doesn't matter how close it is. Dangerous excavation, or dangerous equipment, pardon me. It's not word E. Dangerous equipment, you got to be protected from dangerous equipment. Doesn't matter how far away it's from. Overhand bricklaying work. What is this? This is the mason's exception. The masons say usually we put our block and stuff like that from the outside, from scaffolds, but sometimes we're doing it from the inside and we reach over the wall in order to score our joints, our finishing joints and such like that. So in order to do that, you can't have a guardrail in the way. That would be problematic. And so they made lots of excuses, which ended up resulting in them not getting nearly the insurance breaks that everybody else did, because that's ultimately what a rule does. But it allowed for them to put up a controlled access behind them so that I guess nobody comes up and says boo. That's it. They don't have to do anything for fall protection. They don't even have to argue why a fall protection would be infeasible or create a greater hazard. And think of this. This has no height limitation. They could be on, like, say, the old Guardian building, right? Because it's all brick. Imagine doing overhand bricklaying way up there in the Guardian building. You're reaching over your work as much as 10 inches below your feet to strike a finishing joint. And the boss can legally say, yeah, no, I don't have to do anything. I just got to put a caution tape back there to make sure the electricians and the plumbers and everybody else is safe. I'm not trying to be a pessimist. I'm just trying to relay the fact that these rules are made for insurance adjustment purposes, literally not out of safety. And here's where you can find all of the different varieties of locations and work activities and their options. I'm not going to go through them all like that. I think I conveyed the gist. And then we have, well, on protect side and edge, we got the 3 options. What are you going to use? You're going to put everybody in a harness and lanyard when they come to this small location, or are you going to put a guardrail? You could extend a safety net if you wanted to. It'll be a little odd, but it might not be odd if this was a hoist area. And I've seen that used many times in a hoist area where they'll have an extending net outside the building, and that way they don't have to have fall protection while they're receiving loads at the hoist area because they have a net underneath them. It's just like the aircraft carrier and a net on the exterior of an aircraft carrier. You don't work in it, you fall in it, and then you climb the hell out back on deck. Anyway, different ways, holes, you got to have adequate cover. I often say to the guy, this guy here died of smoking because the boss was somewhere over this way, and he told him, "Hey, kid, go get a couple rolls of this tar paper and whatever the hell this is." And then he's on his way back, and he's thinking, "Man, I'd like to have a cigarette. And if I go back there, he's going to put me to work. So I'm going to put this stuff down. I'll get cigarettes out of the top of my hard hat here, and I'm going to sit down too while I have a cigarette." And then he falls through the skylight. See, smoking kills. I have no idea, but it seems relevant. I don't know, it looks like it could have happened. Either way, skylights are not designed to be able to withstand twice the intended forces like a human body on them. Covers have to be secured against accidental displacement. Sometimes sheer weight works. Sometimes you have to secure it with fasteners. Sometimes, if you have a small hole that you could just step into or trip into, maybe you make, if this is just say 14 inches by 10 inches, maybe you make an 18-inch square cover. It's an oversized cover, and you didn't want to, for whatever reason, just damage the surface, and then you put a two by two, about maybe 14 inches long, and you screw it onto the plywood. And so now the 2x4 sticking in the hole, or the 2x2 sticking in the hole, and the oversized cover. So it's sloppy. It's protected against accidental displacement, because if you kick it, the 2x2 is going to keep it in the hole. You might even be able to kick it up a little bit, but you'll never expose the hole. The only additional thing you have to do is mark it as a hole or a cover so that nobody comes around looking for a piece of plywood and takes it. Had a terrible situation happen down there at Opus 1 in Detroit, where a kid, second day on the job, working for his neighbor, because they were carpenters putting the parapet wall up on the Opus 1. Anyway, March 20th, storm's rolling in, and the boss says, "Hey, kid, get everything in the middle of the roof. We're going to put a tarp over it. We don't want everything blowing around downtown Detroit when the storm rolls in." And because it's a precast construction, the HVAC guys had already delivered all their materials to the job and saw all these damn holes and said, "We can't walk away from these holes." So they kind of flipped their hoods upside down in these holes, did other things like that, convoluted, kind of fill in the holes, thinking they were going to do a good thing, when the kid picked up a hood and walked into the hole because it wasn't identified as a cover or a hole. It wasn't secured. And what a damn shame. Residential construction poses a lot of issues. I would suggest modular installations like we do in commercial and industrial work would go a long way for these guys putting up bar or trusses, bar joists. But the same thing gets done with bar joists. You put a whole bunch of them together, get all the bracing in, pick it all up at once to avoid a lot of exposure to the heights. Having guys with their skivvies to the backside on the top of an exterior top plate, that's not good. It's not adequate. They do have an option of using a what we call a plan, but they have to prove why it's infeasible or create a greater hazard to use conventional methods before they get into the concept of a plan. This is a nice little picture of seeing the guardrails go up with the first floor walls to provide fall protection for the second floor before you even rolled in a floor joist. They can also act as a kicker for the guardrail too, or kicker for the wall when you go to stand it up. Certainly remove them, put them on the next wall. They did suggest ladders as a solution. I don't ever like to suggest ladders as a solution, especially when we're talking about a work platform. Just because there's no fall protection requirements on a ladder, crazy, right? Well, if you did, believe me, Werner and Louisville wouldn't be too pleased. But anyway, like in Canada, ladders are pretty much outlawed. Their threshold's 10 foot, though, in Canada, so at least they got ladders for a little bit. But this job's probably in California, because I've never seen anything like this around here. Goodness. I have seen those slide guard roof jack with guardrail installations on them over at Wimset, though, for $800 a pair. And now that's good for the eave. It's not good for the rake edge, but it's good for the eave. And I never said I was going to give you a panacea or a one-size-fits-all solution. But maybe you do a fall arrest or rope guide near the eave or the rake edge, and maybe you got guardrail slash slide guards for the eave edge. I just know that finding ways to not have guys in ropes is probably easier, although some guys in ropes really say they can do their work just fine, and that's good too, whatever we get used to. Wall openings or window openings, by definition, is 30 inches tall by 18 inches wide with a sill not more or not as high as 39 inches. 39 inches is the bottom height of a guardrail because it's 42 plus or minus 3. So 18 inches wide by 18 inches tall is a wall opening. Does that include 16 on center studs? No, but if you're working in a green build and they're going 24 inches on center, those stud voids all of a sudden become wall openings. and would require guardrails. So interesting, going to a 2x6 and a 2-foot gap all of a sudden poses fall protection issues, potentially, especially with the bedroom that might be over the foyer. However, that's probably not a green wall anyway, so I don't know. But just kind of point out what a wall opening is. And then there's a bunch of different protections. The conventional methods, guardrail, safety nets, personal fall arrest systems, and hole covers. And then the other systems that are only under certain circumstances in certain environments. So top rails, 42 inches plus or minus 3 inches. Mid rails, you put them halfway in. Toe boards, do you need them? Well, if there's people working below and there's any kind of objects that could potentially be on the floor where you're at, then yes. Is that 100%? Well, pretty much, but I can't say that. It doesn't say that in the rules, but pretty much yes, unless you barricade the area below so that nobody can be down there. That's another option. 200 pounds outward downward force. In order to assure that the 2x4 is capable of 200 pounds outward downward force, we can't span more than 8 foot on center. Got to be secured, of course. These are some of the nets as they might extend from the deck, which is pretty cool. Kind of gets the guardrails out of the way. Different technique. I actually went to the Philippines a couple of years ago and found that they use this by and large. They don't use guardrails like we do. They use this mostly. Thought that was interesting. Personal fall arrest system is an entire system. You're only as good as your weakest link. So ensure that all parts are capable of either 5,000 pounds or twice the intended load as designed by a qualified person. Typically, these systems, a 6-foot static lanyard with shock absorber in it, is going to reduce, as long as you don't have greater than 6-foot free fall, the forces to 900 pounds. So twice 900 is 1,800. That's a lot easier to come up with than 5,000 pounds sometimes. I love this guy. Permanent radiator. They cost about 30 bucks. I'm pretty sure that roofers could probably sell their customers those little doohickeys for probably 100 bucks. I mean, shoot. And then they can make money doing their fall protection. I try to convince them to do it. Can't really tie back on your lanyards unless it's designed for it, which all the lanyards are designed anymore with the larger triangular type snap hooks. I know I'm about at time here. I just want to, you're going to want to make sure your harnesses and lanyards are tight, secure. They might feel uncomfortable. I'll tell you, it's a lot more uncomfortable when they come up really fast. I had a guy tell me about that one time. Obviously, you want to have everything proper working order, inspected. Oh, very important to have a rescue plan because it will cause suspension trauma, which will kill you in apparently less than 15 minutes, maybe even less than 10 minutes if you are suspended in a harness because of the way that the leg straps stop or press in on your femoral artery, stopping your flow, your circulatory system. Here's what I was saying earlier. You got to be covered, secured, and marked as such. A hole is as small as 2 inches in its least dimension. Some people call that a gap, but we'll call it a hole for our purposes. I do not want to keep you any further. I think that I spoke about the critical parts of a guardrail, which is a 200 pounds outward downward thrust. The height of the guardrail, 42 inches plus or minus 3 inches. Those are the critical points of a guardrail system. The 5,000 pound capability of a harness and personal fall arrest system, as well as the concept I didn't mention, but I shall now, the amount of distance that the fall is going to take to arrest using personal fall arrest systems, usually in an almost 20 feet. So personal fall arrest systems actually are really more designed to be used at great height. Safety net system, that's another one of the conventional systems. Otherwise, other positioning devices and other flagging systems that you might see with roofers are optional. Again, I don't want to belabor your time. I thank you guys. I hope that it was somewhat informative. I really appreciate a tremendous amount. The few of you that did show your faces, it really made a big difference to me to be able to kind of look at you, see if you were listening, smiling, or getting some of the information. Otherwise, I hope you guys have a great day and a good weekend. And I don't know if I'm going to see you in the next one of these, which is in a couple of weeks, but which will be in person, so you won't be able to hide then. Any questions outgoing? All right, thank you very much. And I don't know if Sue's in here, but thank you.